said that we didn't exactly know what necessarily would trigger something like a system startup.
Correct.
But some of the other ones would be pretty obvious, like engine on obviously means somebody cranked the car. Right?
Yeah, the engine was turned on at that point.
Okay. And I'm not going to go through that spreadsheet again. I just wanted to clarify that. And how long did this process take you, this reverse engineering process?
Our whole analysis took just about 1 year.
Wow. It's a long time.
It's a hard effort.
Will you be able to reuse this work on other 2021 Chevy Suburbans?
Some of the tools we developed will be reusable.
And I asked before, and I guess no one reached out to the manufacturer for assistance in this process?
Our group did not.
Okay. Do you know why? I mean, I think yesterday you said in the past there wasn't, they weren't very helpful, but it seems like the worst they could do is say no. Do you know why it was decided to not reach out?
For our unit, I believe that our attempt is to get the data ourselves without outside assistance. In many cases, we end up finding data that even the manufacturer doesn't know is there.
Okay. Now I want to turn to what I think a technical issue was resolved, and I'm going to show you a printout that has been marked as Defendant's Exhibit 90, and I believe you've had a chance to review this.
Yes, sir. I've reviewed this material.
And you recognize it?
Yes, this is from our results.
And what is this?
This is a list of events that were recorded from the vehicle. There was a category we called events that just listed times that something interacted or something occurred with the vehicle.
And on this printout, the only event, I guess, listed here are iPhones or something called Richard's iPhone earlier on connecting to the vehicle. Is that correct?
I see from the first page here, yeah, there's one that's labeled iPhone with a Bluetooth MAC address, and it's a device connection timestamp.
If you've seen this before in your review, and you can look at it now. Do you see is this pretty much all device connections, phones connecting to the Bluetooth in the car?
Yes, I see other Bluetooth devices connecting as well.
And is it, just to be clear on this, the only phone connecting in the month of June, at least, is one named iPhone that has a phone number ending in 1227. Is that correct?
The phone number itself is not listed on this page. It is the Bluetooth MAC address that is identified by.
Okay. Is the under connected devices, right above the word events where it says iPhone and there's a MAC address, is the IMSI number that's listed there, 803-942-1227, is that the phone number?
That's for the iPhone, correct.
Okay. And that's the phone that was connecting in June?
That appears to be the only one that connected in June.
Yes. Is this something that you also had to reverse engineer out of the vehicle?
Yes, all of the data we found was unknown prior to taking a look at the test vehicle.
And the event that we're looking at here, device connection, that is the phone connecting to the Bluetooth in the vehicle so that you could use it for whatever goes over the Bluetooth connection, whether it's phone calls or apps or whatever, depending on.
Yeah, and it indicates a connection event from the Bluetooth to the vehicle's infotainment system.
And up here in connected devices, does this indicate that this iPhone was, I guess, paired to the vehicle?
That's correct.
Okay. And so, in your experience, if your phone is paired to your vehicle and Bluetooth is on and it connects, that typically happens automatically when you get in and turn it on if your phone is with you?
Yeah, if there's a device that is registered, paired to the vehicle, it will automatically connect to that vehicle.
finally, I just want to ask about, you had mentioned in your direct testimony that there's sometimes you can get location data. Were you able to get location data from the vehicle?
From the infotainment system, we had limited location data, and there was some location data recovered from the OnStar module.
And do you recall, was there any location data recovered for the day of June 7th, 2021?
There was no location data recovered on June 7th.
And in fact, there wasn't any for June 6th or June 8th either. Is that correct?
I'd have to verify those dates, but in this essence, on the day of interest in June 7th, there was no location data.
Your Honor, I apologize, I forgot to please move Defendant's Exhibit 90 into evidence, I believe, without objection.
No objection.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Not from the stage, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
Call your next witness.
The state calls Chris Wilson.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth so help you God?
I do.
If you would, please, sir, be seated and state your name and spell the last name. Yeah.
My name is James Christopher Wilson, Wilson. I go by Chris.
Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning.
If you would, tell the jury just a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to school, and what you do for a living, please.
Well, as I said a moment ago, my name is Chris Wilson. I grew up in Bamberg, about 35, 40 minutes west of here. Graduated school there, went to school up in Spartanburg for college. Came back to Columbia to go to law school at USC. Finished law school in 1994, worked for a judge in Greenville for 1 year, and then moved back to Bamberg where I grew up to practice law, and I've been practicing law there since 1995.
Are you going to have a solo practice in a firm?
Right now it's me and one associate. I've had my own firm since 1998. And there have been varying associates that have worked with me, or at one time I had a couple partners, and one partner left, and then one partner moved, and so we split up as a result of that. But I've had my own practice since '98 with different people coming and going.
And what's the name of the practice?
Right now it's Wilson Law Group.
Wilson Law Group?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury what kind of legal work you do, please.
I do all kind of cases, but over the last 10 to 15 years I've primarily concentrated on just personal injury cases, people that are injured in wreck or hurt at work, a lot of those, just personal injury cases.
Do you know the defendant?
I do.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you point him out for the jury?
Yes, sir, redhead with the glasses over there between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Harpootlian.
Your Honor, can the record reflect he's identified the defendant?
Yes.
Tell me how you came to know the defendant.
I've known Alec since we were in high school. I think I was a year younger than him, but Bamberg and Hampton are only about 30 miles apart, and so we had several mutual friends, people that I was closer to back then, but got to know and be around him some then. We had played some ball against each other, and I think even played on the same ball team one summer. So I knew him a little bit through high school, but not much. Didn't keep in touch at all when we were in college. Started law school at the same time together, and became really close friends through law school. Lived together a little bit of that time. Finished law school. I moved to Greenville. He moved to Beaufort, and we would keep in touch some, but we were a little bit separated. And then when I moved back to Bamberg and he ultimately moved back to Hampton, we got much, much closer. Our wives had known each other through college, and so they became closer friends. Our kids grew up together, You know, we just spent a lot of time together personally, and then he and I did a number of cases together. We worked professionally together.
Did y'all become close friends over the years?
Yes, sir.
Best friends?
Yes, sir. I considered him to be one of my best, if not my best friend. Yes, sir.
Did you get to know his family?
Very much. Not just his wife, not just Maggie, not just Paul, but, you know, Buster and his parents, you know, his in-laws, his brothers and sisters, his mom and daddy. I mean, the whole family. And they knew my family, or he knew my family.
Y'all did things together socially?
Yes, sir. We had kids the same age. Our kids are close. We did a lot of things together, and we worked together.
Up until about June of 2021, did you talk to the defendant almost every day?
Yes, sir. I didn't see Alec all the time, not every day, maybe not even once a week, but we talked by phone probably pretty much every day, several times a day sometimes. Sometimes just about, you know, Gamecocks and football and baseball and whatever, sometimes about kids, sometimes about business, sometimes about cases we were working on, just all kind of stuff.
Did you feel like you knew him pretty well?
I did.
You mentioned y'all worked some cases together. How many cases together did you work over the years?
Well, my firm, when I first started out by myself, was smaller. I didn't have a lot of resources. I was just getting started. His firm was bigger with a lot more resources and a lot more lawyers. They handled some bigger cases that I really wasn't capable of handling together on my own. And so when it first started out, I was associating him and his firm a lot more often, probably over the course of, you know, these last 20 years, probably 25 or 30 cases. But it slowed down. I mean, as my firm got bigger and I became more experienced and could handle a lot more things on my own, it was less and less often that I would associate his firm. But if I ever felt like it could benefit my client with either the type of case that I was handling or where the case was going to be brought to have his firm involved, I would call Alec.
How many times do you think you worked a case with him or shared a case with him over the years?
Probably 30, maybe more.
When did that start, do you think?
I opened my own. I didn't do it any until I opened my own office in '98, and I don't remember exactly when he moved back to Hampton from Beaufort, but it was probably starting in the early 2000s or somewhere thereabouts.
And were all of these plaintiff's cases where y'all are representing a plaintiff who had had some alleged injuries or something like that, or suffered some sort of harm?
Yes, sir. I mean, there may have been, you know, one or two here or there that was something different than a personal injury case, but almost everything was personal injury cases.
And were all these cases worked on contingency?
Yes, sir.
And can you explain to the jury what a contingency is, how a lawyer gets paid with a contingency type case?
Sure. A contingency fee is basically the attorney and the client enter into an agreement on the front end of the case when the client retains the attorney. There are no attorney's fees up front. There's no prepayment. There's no hourly billing arrangement. Basically, the attorney has an interest in the case so that when the case resolves, the attorney receives as a fee a portion of the recovery. Generally, it's a third, sometimes 40%, depending on whether suit has to be filed or what type of case it is. But basically, the lawyer is taking all the risk in pursuing the case. If it doesn't work out well, the lawyer doesn't get paid for their time, and generally the lawyer fronts all the cost in pursuing the case for court fees, depositions, experts, all of that type of stuff. And so at the end, if there's a recovery, the attorney's repaid their fee contingent on a successful outcome and repaid whatever costs are advanced in the case.
Those costs and expenses, the cost of litigating the case, hiring an expert, travel, taking depositions, court costs, things like that.
Yes, it gets very expensive.
Do those come out of the lawyer's 33% or 40% of the recovery, or are those recovered separately from the lawyer's fees?
Separately and in addition to the fee.
In the cases that you've worked with Alec over the years, was he with PMPED during those cases?
Yes, sir. I don't believe I associated him on any cases when he was in Beaufort. It was not until he returned to Hampton.
If you are in your firm and Alec is in his firm and y'all are sharing a case and ultimately you're successful, there's a settlement, there's a trial verdict, and you get a recovery, How do you go about splitting that fee?
All of that's agreed to up on the front at the beginning of the case. So, for instance, a client comes in and hires me for whatever reason, whatever type case. If I look at it and decide that I could use some help, either because there's a lawyer that knows that area of law better than I do, or maybe they're more local to the case, or maybe I just need some extra manpower, whatever it is, when I associate that lawyer and his firm, we make an agreement at the beginning as to what the fee split will be, and the client approves that and signs off on it. It's generally 50-50 on almost all the cases. I think on every case I ever worked with this firm, it was a 50-50 split on the fees.
In those cases that you worked with Alec over the years up until one at the end, did your office typically handle the disbursement of the fees when the settlement money came in?
Yes, sir. I mean, I've gone back through all my files, and with the exception of one or two cases that I think were a little bit different than normal, his firm had part of the family who had lost a loved one, and I had part of the family that had lost a loved one. And instead of them having a dispute about who was going to control and handle the case, we decided to work together, and so the firms worked together. And everything may have gone through them on those cases, but on cases that I associated his firm on, that I went to them to bring them into the case, I would generally handle the disbursements, yes, sir.
All right, and when we say handle the disbursements, does that mean your office would handle actually cutting the checks to the client as well as to his firm for their share of the lawyer's fees as well as their share of any expenses to be reimbursed?
Yes, sir. When the money would come in, whether it was by a settlement or a verdict that had been paid, the money would come to my office and it would have to sit in my account for the appropriate amount of time. And then when checks were ready to be written, I would write the checks to his firm for their fees and for their cost, to my firm for my fees and my cost, to any medical bills or liens or anything had to be paid, and to the client for their money.
Okay. And you would write the checks for his share of the fees to the firm, is that correct?
Yes, sir, to PMPED, Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Dietrich, and Elsroth.
When you would write those checks to his firm, would there be one check or two? Would you put the fees and his share of reimbursed costs in one check together, or would you write two separate checks?
Starting out, I think we would include, not just for his firm, but for my firm, fees and costs would be in the same check. And then, more than 10 years ago or so, and maybe even longer than that, we started doing it in two separate checks just to keep the accounting of it easier, to keep up with what part of payment was fees and what part of the payment was cost. So, over the last 15 years, it's been two checks.
Do you have a staff member who helps you? Who's kind of your main staff member that might handle some of these disbursements?
I have several different staff people that help me handle cases and disbursements. I have a bookkeeper that keeps up with the checking accounts and writes all the checks that I instruct her to write, and then I'm the only person with signatory authority. And I have a staff member that helps me work cases and actually helps me put together disbursement sheets and check medical lien balances and who's owed what money and those type things.
And who is that person you're referring to?
Vicky is the person that helps me do all of that.
Do you ever have called to work a case with the defendant involving Mack Trucks?
Yes, sir. I contacted Alec and his firm to get involved and work with me and another lawyer on a case involving Mack Trucks.
All right, and tell the jury just a little bit about the case without getting into too much detail. What kind of case was it?
Sure. So, lawyer contacted me about a wreck that a client of his had been involved in. A drive shaft out of a Mack truck had fallen into the interstate as the vehicles were traveling down the road. This gentleman's vehicle, along with a bunch of other vehicles, hit this drive shaft, and he was injured. And so this lawyer, it was a trucking case when he first contacted me and looked at it, and that's a lot of what I do, so he called me for some help with that.
Okay. And so you got involved in this particular case?
I did.
As you looked at the particular case, did you decide to involve the defendant?
I did. Very quickly after looking at it, this other lawyer and I both realized that this case was probably a products liability case, that the drive shaft shouldn't have just fallen out of the truck for no reason like that, and that there might be something to do with a defect in the truck. And we found some information about a recall or a potential recall, and I knew that's what Alec and his firm specialized in, those type cases, so I called him and asked him to get involved. We were pushing some deadlines to bring in all the parties that we needed to, so it was important to get somebody involved in it fast that knew what they were doing.
And did he agree to get in on this particular case?
Yes, sir.
So you got 3 attorneys in there who are going to split the fee. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury, again, without getting too much into the weeds, tell the jury a little bit about how the litigation went. Did y'all ultimately try the case and kind of set up how y'all ultimately got to that point?
Sure. So we actually brought 2 cases. We brought one case for the wife of the gentleman that was injured in the wreck for what are called loss of consortium claims. That generally is just the loss of a spouse, their loss of the services of their other spouse. Maybe that spouse can't do all the things around the home they used to do, or they can't be quite the husband or the wife that they were before. So we brought a claim for the wife for loss of consortium, and we brought a separate case for the husband for his personal injuries. Not to get too technical, but the wife's case, Mack Trucks didn't answer the papers like they were supposed to, and so they went into default on that case, and that put them in a really bad spot. On the husband's case, they answered the papers and initially contested the case, but after getting Alec and his firm involved in the case, we started doing discovery, which means we were asking for a bunch of documentation and things, and I'm not sure that they just didn't want us looking any further. And so they reached out to us, and we had communications with them about ways to try to pursue the case outside of the traditional going through all of that and going to a jury trial. COVID had hit, and so things were slowed up in the court, and ultimately we reached an agreement to try both of those cases together in front of a judge without a jury. Both parties waived any rights to appeal. Mack Trucks admitted liability, and we agreed to waive punitive damages. I think that's the structure we tried it under.
Let me ask you 2 quick questions about that. You said that COVID had hit, and like the rest of the world, that had slowed up everything in court, correct?
Very much.
And some things were moving, but because things were slowed up in court, that might slow up the ability to get verdicts and settlements and that sort of thing. To some extent, COVID had an effect on everybody. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then you mentioned in this particular case, you ultimately agreed for both parties to waive the right to appeal. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did that have the effect of meaning that whatever verdict was issued, it wouldn't be tied up in the courts for a long time, the money would go ahead and be paid?
Yes, sir.
Did y'all eventually try that case in front of a judge instead of a jury?
We did in January of 2021, first couple weeks.
Okay. And did the defendant try that case with you?
He did.
Okay. And did y'all ultimately get a verdict?
We did. We got verdicts in both cases.
Okay. And do you remember how much those verdicts were?
Combined, they were $5.5 million. I believe it was $4 million on the husband's case. He had passed away, I believe, within about 4, 5, or 6 months of us going to trial. So I think it was $4 million on behalf of his estate for his injuries and what that had cost for him. And then I believe it was $1.5 million on the wife's loss of consortium.
Who did the closing argument in that case?
Alec did.
For y'all's side?
Alec did.
The defendant did?
Yes, sir.
Did he get emotional in closing?
He did.
Did he spend much time with the husband in that case?
I don't think Alec had spent a lot of time with the gentleman. He had been kind of sick towards the end, and I don't know that Alec had spent a lot of time with him. He had spent a lot of time with the wife, and especially throughout that week in trial. I mean, it was an emotional case. They had serious loss.
Closing argument, that's when the lawyer gets up and sort of summarizes the case to the judge or the jury, depending on what kind of case it is?
Yes, sir. Honestly, you do more than summarize. You argue.
You argue.
Yeah, you put your heart into it, and you tell the judge or the jury why it is you hope and think they do what you're asking them to do.
You said the verdict was how much in total?
$5.5 million combined.
And what does that mean the fees were going to be for the 3 lawyers involved in this case?
I don't remember the exact split for everybody. I know that my fee was going to be like $791,000, and the fee payable to Alex firm was going to be $792,000.
And do you recall?
And I
when
don't
y'all-
remember the third attorney right off the top of my head.
Do you remember when you received that $5.5 million into your trust account?
Yes, sir. Part of it came in by wire, but it was a smaller part, and I want to say that was about. We tried it in the first. The judge didn't issue a ruling right on the spot. It took a couple weeks for him to issue his ruling, which is normal. And then within a couple weeks of that, after some back and forth with Mack Trucks' attorney about whether they were going to file any kind of post-trial motions, or they could have tried to file an appeal and see where it went, even though we had an agreement up front. We were worried that they might get around that. But anyway, after a couple weeks of back and forth, and a wire was sent for part of the money, right, probably middle of February, and then shortly after that, a check arrived for the rest of the money.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't remember exactly. I want to say the last few days of. No, it's probably the last few days of February, somewhere around in there. 2021.
Hold on for me 1 second.
Your Honor, for the record, I just want to object to this line of questioning under 404, 403, and to this exhibit. I do not have any additional objections other than those that were previously made.
I don't know what the exhibit is.
Sure.
Your Honor, this is just a text, but it's related to the in-camera matters that have been addressed.
Admitted over objection.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as admitted into evidence as Stakes 450, and see if you recognize that document, please.
Yes, sir. This looks like a snapshot of a text string that I would have provided that is just communication between me and Alec.
All right. And in the middle of that particular text, that particular page, there's some text, and do you see the date on that?
March the 10th. This would be 2021.
All right. And that's a text from the defendant, is that correct?
Yes, sir. It looks like we had been talking about getting together to play golf, and then he texted me. You want me to read it?
Go ahead and read that to the jury, what your text conversation right there is.
March 10th. I need to get checked today. If it's just too much for you, I will deal with it.
All right. And what's your response?
I'm working on it.
So that's March 10th of 2021, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
May I have the Elmo, please? All right, well, let's talk about that text a little bit. So does that text help you kind of get an idea of roughly when the disbursement check came in on the Mack truck case?
Yes, sir. So by our rules, the Supreme Court, any check that's of a certain size has to be in your trust account for at least 10 days before you could disperse. And this was a sizable check, so I was going to wait more than 10 days just to make sure there weren't any problems. So if that's March the 10th, like I said, those checks, the final amount of that money would have come in sometime, towards the end of February. Because I think I waited 12 to 15 days, as I recall.
You said it's a sizable amount of money. This was a pretty big recovery, correct?
Yes, sir.
I imagine you contacted the other attorney and you contacted the defendant to say, hey, got the money in.
I did.
Did you when you contacted the defendant about that, what, if anything, did he say?
Great news, good. I told him that I was going to sit on it a little bit longer than normal to disperse, just because if it had all come in a wire, I could have dispersed immediately because those are considered received funds. But with it being a check, I wanted to wait. And so I let both of them know that I had received the money and that I wasn't going to do it on the 10th day, but that I would do it shortly thereafter.
Did the defendant ask you to do anything when it came time to dispersing his firm's share of the funds?
He did, yes, sir.
All right, tell me about that conversation.
When it came time to disperse the checks, and I was calling him and the other lawyer to let them know that I'd have the checks ready, I guess somewhere around March the 10th, Alec told me that he was going to put the monies into an annuity, that he was going to put his fees in an annuity. He called it a structure, but in essence he explained he was going to put those monies into an annuity, and that the checks needed to be made payable directly to him instead of to his firm so that he could do that.
Okay. And did he explain to you why he was going to do that?
He had just indicated that he was putting money away. He indicated he was concerned about the boat case, and that he was going to put some monies in an annuity or into a structure.
You say he was concerned about the boat case. What exactly what was he concerned about? What did he tell you he was concerned about?
He was concerned about his exposure in the boat case.
In a civil lawsuit?
Yes, sir.
And you were aware that the defendant had been sued civilly in the boat accident case?
Yeah, I didn't know if he had been sued himself, but I knew there was a lawsuit going on involving, and I believe I did know that he was himself sued at that time. Yes, sir.
So this was different than how you normally did things, correct?
Very much.
Did he have any further explanation to you as to why this would be okay? Why this was all right to do?
He told me that he had already cleared it with the partners in his firm. I mean, he was a partner himself with the authority to do things for the firm, but he told me he had already cleared it with his partners in the firm, and that they were going to put the monies on the books, and that they would be accounted for at the end of the year whenever they did their year-end settle up, that he would already be accounted for as having been paid these monies already.
Looking back at this exhibit that's now up on the screen, on March 10th, exhibit 450, he says, "I need to get the check today." Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did he tell you any more about why he needed to get the check today?
I spoke to him on the phone that day, and he just asked me if the checks were going to be ready that day. As I recall, I was on the road. I wasn't sure I was going to make it back to the office or not. My bookkeeper was getting the checks ready, and I spoke to him on the phone and told him that if I got back in time to sign the checks, I'd have them ready that day. He told me he'd like to get them that day. Yes, sir.
He told you that he had already cleared this with the partners. They were okay with him getting this money right now instead of having to wait till the end of the year.
He told me that the partners were aware that the monies were being paid to him, that he was going to put them into annuities, and that they would be accounted for on the books of the firm as already having been credited as paid towards him.
Did you believe the defendant when he told you these things?
Yes, sir. I didn't have any reason not to.
Your best friend?
Yes, sir.
Did you trust him?
I did.
Didn't set off any red flags to you at this point?
No, sir. And I'd known him for 30 plus years and didn't have any reason not to trust him.
Did you ultimately initially write a couple of fee checks?
I did, yes, sir. I think I wrote one check in the gentleman's case and one check in the lady's case. And then the gentleman's check was rewritten into two checks. These were, when I say these checks, I'm talking about fees that were paid.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's previously been marked as State's Exhibit 345. You said the total fees that were going to go to Alec in this case were how much?
$792,000.
And he asked you to write the checks out to who?
To him.
Him directly.
Him, Richard Alexander Murdaugh.
Instead of what?
Instead of PMPED or the law firm.
Which would be the normal practice.
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm going to show you what's been marked as 345 and see if you recognize this document. State's 345.
I do.
All right, what is that?
So this is a check that was initially written to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Esquire, for $600,000 on March 10th, 2021. This says fees on the bottom. This would be the fees on the gentleman's case for payable to his firm, which Alec told me to write to him. This check was voided and rewritten into two separate checks.
All right.
And it's marked void.
All right, Your Honor, this time I would move to admit States 345 into evidence.
Your Honor, we do not have any additional objections to that document.
It's admitted.
All right. And this check is made out for how much?
$600,000.
All right, and again, there were two cases, so there were going to be two separate checks. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. This was just the fees on the gentleman's case.
And that was going to be how much total?
Total was $792.
But this one is
$600.
And then the one for the other one?
$192.
192. Okay. All right. And so you initially write this check. Did you deliver this to the defendant, or what happened?
I didn't deliver any of the checks. I believe he had somebody pick them up that day from his office, a runner or something like that. But no, so this check was voided out, and we rewrote two separate checks made payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh.
Why did you do that? Why did you void this one for $600 and then write two separate checks?
When I called Alec and told him, or when we were talking and I told him I thought the checks would be ready, he instructed me that he was doing three separate annuities, and so it would need to be in three checks, and that this check would need to be made out in two different checks that totaled $600,000.
A bunch of different annuities, huh?
Yes, sir. It wasn't all going into the same annuity or the same place.
So you recut into two checks, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as States 346 and see if you recognize that set of documents, please.
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, just flip through it real quick.
Can't even tell you what they are.
Well, just flip through it first, if you would, please.
Yes, sir, I recognize all of this.
All right, and tell the jury what those are, please.
So the top document is the $192,000 check dated March the 10th, 2021, made payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Esquire. And on the bottom it says fees. That would have been the fees on the lady's loss of consortium case.
Okay.
The back of it, the rest of it's just the back of the check. Looks like it's endorsed Bank of America, deposit only. A signature that looks like Alec, but it's kind of scribbled and says Bank of America.
Okay.
The next page is a check for $225,000 dated March 10th, 2021, payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Esquire. And on the bottom it says fees. This would be part of the rewrite of that $600,000 check.
All right.
Same type of endorsement paperwork on the back. And then the third check is a check dated March 10th, 2021 for $375,000 made payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Esquire, and on the bottom it says fees. And that would be the second part of the rewrite of that $600,000 check for the fees in the gentleman's case.
All right. Your Honor, at this time I would move to admit States 346 into evidence.
And we don't have any additional objections, Your Honor.
They're admitted.
All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as States 347, see if you recognize those two documents, please.
I do.
All right, tell me what those are.
So these are two checks from my firm made payable to Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsworth, and Dietrich. The memo part is redacted, but I know what these are. So these were cost reimbursement checks in both of these cases. One check for the gentleman's case and one check for the wife's case. They're dated May 13th of 2021 made payable to the law firm. One of them is for $14,619.13, and one of them is for the same amount except for 14 cents.
All right, tell me the date on those expense checks, please.
May 13th of 2021.
And go back, if you would, and let's again remind the jury what the date of the fee checks are, particularly after they were recut at the defendant's request.
March 10th of 2021.
Let me put these up on the screen real quick. And Your Honor, I'll move in States 347, please.
No objection.
They're admitted.
All right, we're at States 346, and this is the check for $192,000. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And the date is March 10th. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's the day that all three lawyers' checks were cut to be paid.
Same date of that text the jury's seen, correct?
Yes, sir.
Next page. This is the check for how much?
$225,000.
And that's part of the $600K.
Yes, sir.
Same date.
Yes, sir. March the 10th.
And that's your signature on there.
It is.
Going back to the first one, you said that looks like whose handwriting?
Yes, sir.
Whose?
Alex.
Right there on the second check on the back. That looks like whose handwriting to you?
I mean, the top left of it looks like Alex's signature.
Okay. And then finally, this last check, that's the $375 that's part of the $600,000.
Yes, sir.
Is that your signature right there on the check?
It is.
And the same date?
Yes, sir. March 10th.
And do you recognize that signature at all?
I mean, it looks like Alex, but I mean,
Best as you can see on the
best
sky.
I can tell, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. What those particular checks? What did you? Once those were cut, the defendant's been texting you about it. What did you do once you recut them?
I think, as I said a little earlier, at some point in time we were having a phone conversation, and I told him that I was on the road, that if I got back and was able to sign them, I'd let him know. And I ultimately did make it back to the office, I believe, that day, was able to get the checks signed, and either called him and said they're ready, and he said I'll send somebody up to get them, or maybe I called him as I was going back to the office, but before I actually signed them, and said, hey, I will be back to sign them, and they'll be ready. And he said, well, I'm going to send somebody up to get them. Okay. And so they would have come up. I think he had a runner come up that day that would have picked up a package that had those checks. I don't remember exactly for sure, but generally it's going to be those checks, a cover letter, and a package that has a partial disbursement sheet. Our client had signed off on allowing the fees to go ahead and be paid. Then, while we were waiting on some liens to resolve themselves, some costs to come in, and some things like that. So our client had signed off on a partial settlement statement, and I would have provided that.
The voided check we saw before, and these checks all have the same date. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, they do.
All right. And do you recall anything about that? Did you call him up and say, hey, great news, I got it taken care of? He said, wait. How did that go down?
I don't remember. I don't remember how many different conversations we had that day, whether it was over, one conversation or two conversations. I don't remember. But at some point, he instructed me that the $600,000 check needed to be made into separate checks.
And he sent somebody to pick them up.
I didn't mean to cut you off. We talk a lot every day, and so we probably had multiple conversations that day. But at some point, he instructed me to do that.
He's one of your best friends.
Yes, sir, very much. Not just my best friend, Mr. Wars. Our families were close. Our kids, our wives, we're close.
You had a friendship with Maggie, too.
Yes, sir, very much.
You had a friendship with Paul, too.
Yes, sir.
You had a friendship with Buster, too.
Yes, sir. Haven't been able to have that since. Not like it was, but yes, sir. Hope to one day. But yes, sir.
Why didn't you disperse the fee checks the same day? Do you recall?
The fee checks were
I'm
dispersed.
sorry, my bad.
Cost
The
checks?
expense checks, the cost checks.
Yes, sir. We were still waiting on some costs to come in, and we had several experts in that case, and it's not abnormal to have costs that come in after a settlement or after a verdict that you reach. Sometimes you're taking depositions up to the last minute. Sometimes you have experts that are working. They're going to send you their bill for their trial time, and so a lot of times those costs will come in. I think our client had authorized us to hold some money back in escrow for an expected cost. And so we had a lot of bills that were coming in even into late April.
You mentioned that the defendant had said something about his exposure in the boat accident lawsuit as a reason for structuring these fees.
Yes, sir.
Did he say any more about that?
Not in that conversation when he asked me to write the checks directly to him. We had some other conversations, and I don't remember if they were before this or after this. I think they were after, but I don't remember for sure, where he had just said that there was, some fights going on between insurance companies.
When the defendant asked you to do this unusual step and write the fees direct to him, and you said you trusted him, correct?
Yes, sir.
What was your general perception of his law practice, of his wealth, of his financial security, knowing him as well as you did? What was your perception of that?
Big firm, big reputation. Alec had a big reputation. I thought he made a whole lot more money than I did. Everything I knew from the way his partners treated him, the type of cases I saw him working on with them, the type of cases I knew he worked on with me, that he was, one of the biggest dogs in that firm, one of the biggest producers they had. Seemed to own a lot of things, do a lot of things, spend money. Didn't ever seem to have problems. And I knew I was associating him and his firm on very good cases throughout the years, and I knew other lawyers that were. It just seemed like they were doing very well, and that he specifically was doing very well.
And is that perception that you had of him one of the reasons why you trusted him? That there was no shenanigans going on?
I don't know that that's the main reason. I trusted him because I knew him and had dealt with him personally and professionally for a long time. But I had no idea if he was having money problems. I would have never suspected that his asking me to write checks to him had anything to do with money problems on his behalf. Nothing gave that appearance. So, that could have factored into the back. But mostly it's just I knew the guy and I trusted him. And he wasn't asking me to do anything that raised any flags with me. He told me he had cleared it with his firm and with his partners. I didn't have any reason to doubt that.
I'm going to put States 347 up on the screen. And what are these again?
That's a cost reimbursement check in one of those cases. I can't tell you which one it is.
All right. And then if we go 2 pages back, this is the other check?
Yes, sir, in the other case, cost reimbursement.
All right. And those are the same amount?
1 penny difference. I think Alec sent me the cost total, and I just split them evenly between the 2 cases.
And what's the date on that check, those checks?
May 13th of 2021, which I believe would be the time, obviously, we wrote the checks, and they would have been mailed to his office shortly thereafter.
And you said that there was a reason why these came a couple months later?
Yes,
Y'all
sir.
were waiting for some information?
Waiting on costs to finalize up. Instead of writing multiple checks as costs came in, we just kind of wait sometimes till the final bill's received.
Is that your signature on these checks?
Yes, sir.
And those would have been mailed to Alec's law firm, correct?
That's the general practice, yes, sir, is we mail them to the firm. And I don't know any reason why these wouldn't have been done differently.
In May of 2021, did your office, after these checks were mailed, did your office receive any communication from the defendant's law firm?
My paralegal, Vicky, received an email from Alec's paralegal, Annette.
And tell me about that. What was the communication? It was received from Annette.
Yes, sir, from Annette Griswold, Alex Paralegal.
All right, your paralegal, Vicky, received a communication from Annette Griswold, the defendant's paralegal.
Yes, sir. Vicky got an email from Annette that said, hey, we got the, something to the effect of, hey, we received the cost checks, either why no fee checks or where are the fee checks.
Okay. And did Vicky respond to that?
She did.
And what did she respond?
She responded to Annette that the reason the fee checks weren't included is because they had already been paid to Alec, that he had already received the fee checks.
Was that on about May 19th, 2021?
I'd have to look at the email, but I believe so, yes, sir.
Did Vicky raise any issue with you at this point? Did you know anything about it at this point?
No, sir. I was preparing, I was in trial the following week in Hampton, actually all week long, and I was preparing for that. Vicky sent that email back. She didn't notify me about that actually until all this blew up, and I turned all that over to SLED after we found it, after all this blew up in September.
Moving into late May 2021, did this matter that Annette was raising with your firm come to your attention?
It did.
And tell me.
And it wasn't late May. It was the first part of June.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibit 348 and let you take a look at that real quick before we move on.
Sure.
See if you recognize that.
I do.
So tell me what that is.
So this is this is an email string that begins on May the 27th from Jeannie Seckinger, which is the bookkeeper or accountant in Alex Law Firm. And it's an email from Jeannie to Annette Griswold, Alex Paralegal, on May the 27th, where she telling Annette that she got the expense checks and it didn't match their records, that Alec thought he had more outstanding cost but can't say what, and was asking Annette to reach out to my office, to Vicky, to get some more information. Okay. And then it looks like Annette forwarded that email to Vicky on May the 27th. Vicky was on vacation and did not come back in until the following week. It looks like she emailed her again on June 2nd. Vicky might have come back in on like June the 1st, or I think May the 31st was Memorial Day, a Monday, and so June the 1st was then when Vicky came back in. So Annette emailed her again on June the 2nd and asked for some information, and then Vicky emailed her back and said, since this involves documents she didn't deal with, which was bookkeeping stuff that she didn't deal with, she would forward it to me.
And so that happened on what day?
June the 2nd.
Of what year?
2021.
Your Honor, this time I'd offer States 348 into evidence.
No additional objections, Your Honor.
Admit it.
All right, and so this is going to the bottom. This is the email from Jeannie to Annette. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then that gets sent from Annette to Vicky on May 27th, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then she gets back from vacation, and then she responds on June 2nd, 2021, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what does she say?
She's going to forward that to me. And she did. She CC'd me up in the email string.
All right. And did you have a conversation with Vicky at that time about this issue?
I did.
What did you tell Vicky, or what was y'all's conversation?
She said, I've gotten this email from them asking about the cost in this case. What do you want me to do? And I said, tell them that you'll forward it to me and I'll deal with it.
Around this time, had you had any conversation from any other partners in PMPD, the defendant's law firm?
As best I recall, Mr. Waters, I was in Hampton the entire week before, and I was working out of their office. I was trying a case down there like the week of May the 24th, and I was working out of Alex Firm's office. Leecope approached me and said, hey, I need to talk with you about this Mack Truck case. Has all the money been dispersed? I said, Lee, it hadn't all been dispersed. We've got some liens, some medical liens we're waiting on to deal with. We've got some costs that we're waiting on to come in, and it all hadn't been dispersed, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to check on it. And I was stuck in trial through Friday of that, or through Thursday of that week.
Did you reach out to the defendant after Lee had that conversation with you?
I reached out to him after I got this email.
All right. And tell me what your conversation was with him when you reached out to him, having received this email from Vicky asking about these fees.
I called Alec. I said, Alec, I got this email from your firm. They're asking about issues with costs, that you think you've got more costs that are owed to you. I put down on the settlement statement and wrote checks for the amount of costs that you gave me. But if there are more costs outstanding, just figure out what they are, because we've been holding some money back. And I think at that point we were waiting on a medical lien to resolve. And I don't think the client will have a problem paying the cost out of what we're holding back.
Did you have any discussion about the disbursement of the fees at that point?
I did. I said,
tell me about that.
I said, Alec, this is the case that you asked me to write the fee checks directly to you. Is everything all right? And he said, yeah, everything's fine. I just need to make sure my partners know that this is the same case, that you wrote the checks to me, and that it's already on the books.
Did you believe him?
Yes, sir.
After you had that conversation with the defendant, did you do anything else, or did you think it was handled? Because you had spoken to your best friend, Alec Murdaugh.
He told me it was taken care of. He told me he had talked with his partners about it. I didn't think there was any other problem. I didn't do anything else.
A couple weeks later, did you have another conversation with him about this same issue?
Yes, sir. This would have been after June the 7th, yes, sir. And it might have been more than a couple weeks, because I didn't ask him anything after Paul and Maggie. I didn't want to. I asked him if everything was all right, and he said it was fine.
When you got that email forwarded to you from Vicky on June the 2nd, did you call Alec that day?
I think it was, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think it was that day.
Thereabouts?
Yes, sir.
You remember June 7th, 2021?
Yes, sir.
Was that a Monday?
Yes, sir.
Gamecocks had played some baseball that weekend.
Yes,
You'd
sir.
seen the defendant?
I'd seen him and Maggie and Buster, my wife and I, and our children. Had been with him and Maggie and Buster the weekend before, Saturday, yes, sir.
On Monday, June 7th, 2021, what was your day like just during the day?
I went to work. I was in the office most of the day. I think I had something scheduled that it canceled out. And I ate lunch with a friend, and I live in Columbia, even though I practice in Bamberg. Kind of later in the day, I ran by the pharmacy, picked something up, and then headed to Columbia and stopped to pick something up at the store on the way home.
Went home.
Yes, sir.
Normal evening?
Yes, sir.
Remember what you were doing that evening?
Just hanging out with my wife, and I don't remember how many of our kids were home. I think just our youngest. Just watching TV.
Watching TV.
Yes, sir. I was kind of late getting home, so there wasn't a whole lot of the evening left.
That evening, did the defendant call you?
Yes, sir, he did.
About what time did he call you?
I don't remember exactly. I mean, I turned my phone records over, but I think it was around 9:20, 9:15, 9:20.
Before we talk about that, I'm going to show you States 451. Do you recognize that?
I do, yes, sir.
What is that?
This is my phone log that I turned over to SLED.
Does that reflect calls from Alec Murdaugh on the night of June 7th, 2021?
Yes, sir.
Well, tell me.
To and from. Porch, and I was trying to mess with something with the pool pump. Sounded like it was running funky, and so the phone rang, and it was Alec, and I answered the phone.
What did he say?
He said, "Hey, hey Bo" is normally how he would greet you, "Hey Bo," and I don't remember if he said, "What are you doing?" or what. I pretty quickly told him, "Hey, I've got my hands in the middle of this pool pump, messing up. Can I call you right back?"
Did he sound normal to you?
Sounded normal, yes, sir.
So you said, "Hey, I'm busy right now. Let me call you back."
I did, yes, sir.
And what did he say?
Said, "That's fine, no problem."
And having that exhibit, and Your Honor, I apologize, I'd move. States 451 into evidence at this time.
Submit it.
And having a chance to look at your phone records there, what time was that first call?
Looks like it was at 9:11 p.m. incoming from his cell phone.
All right, so you got off.
2-minute phone call.
2-minute phone call.
Yes, sir.
So you got off the phone. What happened next?
I finished trying to fix the pool pump, called Alec back,
All right. And what time was that?
9:20 p.m.
And tell me about that conversation. Tell the jury about that conversation.
Called Alec back. I generally say, "Hey, Bo," too. And, "Hey, Bo, calling you back." He said, "Hey, I'm about to get to my mom's house. Can we talk a little bit later?" And I told him, "Sure." There were a couple of things I needed to talk with him about, cases that one case that we were working on, and one case that I had going on. I wanted a little advice. Ask him how his mama was doing, and I asked him how his daddy was doing, because I knew his dad was getting a lot worse. We had talked about that over the weekend at the baseball game in Columbia, and I think we had talked on the phone on Sunday also. So he said, "Can I call you back, or can we talk later?" And I said, "Sure."
You said his daddy was getting worse. Had he called you that day, Monday, at all, to give you any updates to your recollection?
I don't think we talked earlier in the day on that Monday, but we had talked on that Saturday before and on that Sunday before. And so I knew his father was getting worse, and I think I knew that he was either going to or had already gone to the hospital.
So that second call, was that also very brief? He said, "Hey, I'm at my mama's."
3 minutes.
So what happened after that? You still watching TV?
Still watching TV, yes, sir.
Did you talk to the defendant again?
I did. He, I believe, texted me sometime later that evening, and I think the text was something, "Are you still up?" or "Still up," something like that.
All right, stand by for me real quick.
Sure.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as States 452 and see if you recognize that document.
Yes, sir. This is a snapshot of text communications between me and Alec that I snapshot and provided.
All right. Your Honor, this time I'd move States 452 into evidence.
No objection.
Submit it.
452. This is a screenshot of the text that you of your text that you provided. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And we see down at the bottom, is that a text? Who is that text from?
That's from Alec to me at 9:52 on June the 7th. It says, "Call me if you up."
Okay. Did you receive that text? Were you still awake at that point?
Yes, sir, I was.
All right. And what did you do?
Picked up the phone and gave him a call.
Okay. And tell me about that conversation.
Um,
Call him one time or two times?
No, I called. The first time I called, he didn't answer, which is kind of normal with Alec sometimes. Sometimes he wouldn't answer because he was either on the phone or sometimes he was just in bad service, I think, and couldn't get a call to go through. So I'm pretty persistent. I call right back. So I called him. I didn't get an answer, and then I called him back. And that was at 9:50. According to these records, 9:52 is when I tried to call and didn't get an answer, and I called back at 9:53 and said, "Hey, Alec, I got your text calling you back. How's your mama?" And he said, she's, doing about like normal, I think. I mean, she'd been doing poorly for years. And I told him I needed to talk to him. We had a case we were working on that involved a piece of equipment that had malfunctioned, and the company had preserved the equipment, but they weren't going to preserve it too much longer. We needed to get it inspected, and they were kind of pushing on us about when the inspection was going to occur. And I said, "Hey, we need to talk about this and get this squared away so we don't miss the chance to inspect this equipment, and I need to talk to you about some motions or something I've got upcoming that I need a little help on." And he said, "Hey, that's cool, but I'm about to get back home. Can we talk tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure, fine."
That was some total of what he had to say was he's about to get home to Moselle, and can we talk tomorrow? Correct?
Yes, sir.
You put States 451 up on the screen. And right here, is that your writing right there?
That's my handwriting, yes, sir.
And that says Alex M., and those are the defendant's calls, is that right?
The bottom one is him calling me and me telling him I'm on the pool pump. The next one is me calling him back and telling me he's about to get to his mama's. And then the next one up here is me trying to call him after that text that he didn't answer. And then the top one is me calling him back after he didn't answer and talking to him for those couple minutes.
All right, and then that one in the middle, that's just an irrelevant conversation with some other person?
Just a friend of mine who I told his name was probably coming out today. So I told him that he was on my phone.
We did scratch out his number.
That's right, yes, sir.
Now we did.
Yes, sir. I felt like his name would probably come up today, and he should know that.
Just go about your evening after that? Did you just go about your evening after that?
Pretty shortly after that, I went on to bed. My wife stayed up, but I went on to bed shortly after that.
How'd you find out?
I was asleep. My phone's always kind of sit beside the bed. I could hear it buzzing, but I really wasn't paying it any attention. My wife comes in kind of, just hysterical. She says, you got to wake up. And I don't remember if she was on the phone with Randy's wife or Randy himself. She's trying to tell me what's going on. and I'm looking at my phone, and I've got a text from a person I knew in Hampton that's texting me saying, "Hey, give me a call. I got to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else." It was a person that was in the county government down there that I knew that was just trying to get word to me before I heard it somewhere else. My wife, I don't think I respond to that person or her text immediately. My wife's telling me what's going on. I just told her, I said, I'll get some clothes. I got to go to Moselle. We started trying to call our daughter right at about 11 o'clock. Started trying to call our children, tell them what was going on. I don't even know how much my wife and I spoke about it. I mean, she knew I was leaving. I got in the car, I went straight to Moselle, grabbed some clothes and went straight to Moselle.
How long does that take?
From Columbia, about an hour and 40 minutes or so. I mean, I called some different people on the way that I thought needed to know. I mean, repeatedly tried to call my daughter. She was extremely close. She is and was extremely close to Buster and Paul. And, we couldn't get her to answer. Called her boyfriend, just repeatedly calling her. I think I talked to Randy on the way down, but I can't say for sure I did. But I know I talked to somebody in their family on the way down, just to tell them I was on the way.
About what time did you get to Moselle?
About 1 o'clock in the morning.
Other family and friends were arriving then too?
Already had arrived, I believe, yes, sir. I mean, when I got there, I went through the main gates. I could see, I don't know that I knew at that point that this had occurred at the kennels, but I could see that there was tons of activity there as I passed by to go to the main gate. And when I turned in the main gate, I was on the road headed up to the house. You don't go very far and you can turn right to go to the kennels. I almost was going to turn and go down to the kennels, and I think John, Marvin, and Randy were walking out and kind of waved off and said, "Go to the house."
Is that where you went?
Yes, sir.
Was the defendant there?
He was, yes, sir. Yeah.
You talked to him?
I did. I walked in, hugged his neck, and cried. Didn't know what to say.
Hugged his neck and cried.
Yes, sir.
A lot of people there coming out to support him, as you would expect, correct?
Yes, sir. There were a lot of the lawyers that he practices law with, several family members, some friends of his that I knew. There were a lot of people already in the house, yes, sir.
Did you stay there during the early morning hours as a friend, supporting your friend?
Yes, sir, till 5:30 or so in the morning. 4:35, I don't know. I mean, everybody was shocked and destroyed, and times it felt like it stood still. So I don't know exactly what time it was, but sometime 4 or 5 o'clock that morning, everybody decided it would be best for Alec and Buster to go get some sleep, or at least try to, and not stay there that night. And so I went back to Bamberg and slept in my office.
Did you return to Moselle the next day after getting some sleep?
I did, about 9 o'clock that next morning.
Were you there as much as you could be at Moselle or wherever you were needed over the next few days in the aftermath of all of this?
Yes, sir. I was there almost entirely the next 2 days.
At any point, did you ever have any conversation with the defendant about what he did that night?
Not really, no, sir.
What do you mean by not really?
I mean, I didn't ask him. I didn't want to know what he found. I didn't want him to have to describe that to me. I didn't want him to have to relive it, so I didn't ask him about it.
Didn't ask him about it?
No, sir.
It's only natural.
Yes, sir. I mean, I was there as a friend, supporting him and his family. I didn't need to know the details. I knew all I needed to know is that two people that I loved were gone.
Certainly we're going to ask him about the stupid issue with the fees in this time.
No, sir. Not at all. Didn't know there was an issue with the fee. I mean, I did not know there was an issue with the fee at that time, so I didn't have anything to ask him.
Over the next few weeks, did you do what you could do to be a supportive friend?
I did. Yes, sir. I mean, I tried to call him even more often. If I was anywhere close to Hampton, I tried to stop by and check on him. I tried to make him go places and do things. Not much, but I felt like he needed to get out. You know, just, I mean, I was worried he was going to hurt himself. I mean, I was worried he was going to kill himself, just like I think a lot of people were, family and lawyers, his partners. And so I think we all talk regularly about keeping an eye on him, and about being there for him.
After a few weeks go by, the shock starts to abate just a little bit.
It still hadn't abated.
Still hasn't abated, just a little bit.
Yes, sir.
At some point, does the defendant call you about those fees?
He does. Yes, sir.
You remember roughly when that was?
Sometime around the middle of July.
What does the defendant say to you?
He tells me that he has not been able to put the monies into the annuities like he thought he could, that he's messed it up, and that the monies needed to be paid to his firm, and that that he needs to send the money back to me to run it through my trust account to write the checks to his firm directly.
You remember how that conversation came up?
I don't remember exactly how it came up, no, sir.
But he contacted you to say, hey, I messed up those annuities, I need to send the money back to you, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did he send the money back to you?
Not all of it, no, sir.
What did he send back to you?
$600,000 of the $792,000.
And in what form did he send that money back to you?
It came in the $600,000 came in two separate wire transfers.
Tell me about those.
I don't remember the dates, but I think it was July 15, July 16, somewhere around in there. One came from Almeda State Bank, and I think one came from Bank of America.
One for $350 and one for $250, correct?
Yes, sir, I believe that's right.
That was only $600,000, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had dispersed to him directly how much?
$792,000.
Did you have a conversation with him about the fact that it was $192,000 short?
Yes, sir.
And what was that conversation?
He told me that he had already put the $192,000 away to where he wasn't going to be able to access it. I took it that he had already put it into the annuity and that it wasn't going to be available without some type of penalties or cost. And he said, I don't have the $192, but I'll be able to get it to you very shortly or soon. I don't remember if he said within a couple of days or a couple of weeks or what he said, but it was soon.
What did he want you to do, though, once this money came back in? Did he ask you to do anything?
To rewrite the checks payable for the fees to his firm.
Did he ask you to communicate with the firm at all?
He asked me if I could send an email that I was holding those monies so that they would know those monies were in the trust account.
All right. But you're $192,000 short, so what was his discussion then?
He told me he didn't have the $192,000. And I mean, at that point, I know that I've got a trust account for which I'm responsible for. I've got money that's supposed to have been in my trust account payable to his firm for fees. That's my responsibility. And so I had to put $192,000 of my own money into my trust account to hold for the fees for his firm.
And how did you do that? How did you put $192,000 of your own money into your trust account to cover the defendant?
I wrote a check for myself and put it into my trust account.
And just quickly, explain to the jury why you have to do that. What is it about a trust account that you have to do that if you're going to send that email to the firm?
Because I can't tell somebody I'm holding money in my trust account that I'm not holding in my trust account. I'm responsible for that trust account. Trust accounts are money that belong to someone else that you're holding in a fiduciary relationship, and you're responsible to make sure that those monies are held and dispersed appropriately. And at this point, I'm hearing that I haven't dispersed or paid those monies the way they're supposed to be paid.
At that point in time, did he ask you to cover that money, or was that just kind of a given that he was short?
I knew I had to, and I think he asked me to, but I knew that I had to.
So you get the $600,000 from the two wires, and you write $192,000 of your own money,
Yes, sir.
and then you send an email to the law firm. Is that right?
I sent an email to Alec,
To Alec?
yes, sir, that he tells me he's going to forward to his firm, which I, ultimately found out that he did forward to the bookkeeper and one of his partners.
I'm going to show you States 349 and see if you recognize that.
Yes, sir. This is an email I sent on Monday, July the 19th, 2021 to Alec.
All right. Is that the email you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
All right, this time I'd move States 349 into evidence.
No additional objection, Your Honor.
Admit it. Can you read that email to the jury, please?
Sure. Alec, as discussed, I'm confirming that I am holding in trust $600,000 in the, and that's just redacted to take the gentleman's name out, the gentleman's case, and $192,000 in the, and that's redacted out to take out the wife's name, in the wife's case, which represent attorney's fees. I will continue to hold these monies in trust until I am instructed by you or your firm regarding payment.
After you sent that email, did the firm contact you? Did you have to disperse the money, or did that just kind of end the matter?
Not until September the 3rd, when Leecope called me after they claimed that, after they say that they had discovered that Alec was stealing money.
Well, let's talk about the interim. But at that point in time, you sent that email, and nobody's making any further inquiry at that point in time. Is that correct?
No, sir.
Right, and that money's just sitting there,
Sitting in my trust account.
including your personal 192 that you wrote to cover Alec, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever have a conversation with Alec about when he was supposedly going to get you that money?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that.
I know we talked about it one time. I think it was at the August convention down in Hilton Head that most of the lawyers that do what we do attend. I had begged Alec to come down there and for Buster to come with him at least one day to play golf with some of us so they'd get out and do something so Buster could do something normal. And I think it was while we were playing golf that I just said, hey, where do we stand on you getting me repaid? He told me that, I knew that Maggie's estate would be tied up, and I figured that that was a delay. He told me that he was, moving towards selling some property and that his father had obviously just passed, and that there would be some money coming to him from his father's estate, and that he was working on it, and he was trying to do it as quickly as he could. He apologized for it taking longer than he said it would.
Had he told you that he had tied up some money in structures or something like that, and that's why he couldn't get to it right then?
That's what he told me, why he couldn't get the $192,000, because that he had already put it into, the way I understood it, he had already put it into the annuity and couldn't get it back out. I think once you put those monies away, is my understanding, is you can't just pull them right back out. It's not like a checking account or a savings account where you can deposit and withdraw immediately.
But that's what he's explaining to you, right?
Yes, sir.
So that conversation you had with him at the trial lawyers conference playing golf, that was when, roughly?
First weekend in August. Actually, it'd probably be that we normally try to play golf on that Thursday, so whatever the first Thursday in August is.
Not long after that, did you have another conversation with him about the money that you had covered for him?
I did.
And roughly when was that?
Sometime shortly after that, in the middle of August maybe, I called him up and said, I need to come see you and talk to you about something, and I went down and talked to him about this money. It wasn't it was about the money. I needed to be repaid. That's a lot of money to me, and I wanted to be repaid.
$192,000, that's a lot of money.
Yes, sir.
A lot of money to anybody.
Yes, sir.
I'll show you what's been marked as States 350. You recognize that?
I do.
And what is that?
So,
What's the date on that first?
August 17th of 2021.
Your Honor, at this point, I'd move States 350 into evidence.
Additional objection.
Submit it.
All right. Tell me about that document. What happened? What's your conversations related to that document?
At some point in time when I'm talking to Alec, I said, hey, I need to come see you in your office and talk with you about something. I don't even think I told him exactly what it was. He said, sure. So I went down and went in his office. I said, look, I hate to even talk to you about this and I hate to ask you this, but if something happens to you, you know, and I think I phrased it like if you get hit by a car or something happens and you die, I can't get repaid that money against your estate unless there's something in writing between us. I knew enough to know, enough of the law to know that you can't enforce an agreement with a person that's deceased against their estate unless you got some documentation of it. And I said, boy, I hate to even ask you to do this. And I was worried that he was going to kill himself, you know, still at that point. And I was worried about what that would, mean, more so on a human personal level, but also what that would mean about me trying to get repaid. And I said, I hate to ask you to do this, but can we do this? And he said, sure, no problem. I mean, that's our agreement, and sure. And so we scratched out, he hand wrote it, 3 sentences, nothing formal or fancy.
This is on what day?
August the 17th, and I was in his office.
Hold on for me 1 second.
I'll stand for a moment. These conferences, isn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, we have you go to the jury room for recess. Please do not discuss the case.
No, I just, out of a abundance of caution, before we got to this portion of the witness's testimony, as Your Honor is aware from the in-camera proceedings, there is, he has a confrontation with the defendant, and the defendant tells him some things that he... the witness here has a confrontation with the defendant at his mother's porch after receiving word about what the law firm had found. From the in-camera testimony, the witness has testified that the defendant, admits the financial misdeeds, says he had a drug issue, I think going to rehab, and some things like that. And that is, I believe, on the early afternoon of September 4th. And then not long after that, he hears that the defendant was shot on the side of the road. And so we've had some discussions about the drug issue. So before listening to that testimony, I alerted the defense and wanted to make sure that we had set our ground rules on that. And then, of course, the side of the road issue, which we've talked about earlier.
What ground rules did you set?
Your Honor sets the ground rules, and that's.
You take a break during questioning the witness to have a conference with counsel.
Well, I am seeking to admit that evidence, not only of what the defendant said about his drug use, but also to submit that not long after that he heard about the side of the road incident, and I, out of abundance of caution, raised that issue, and I believe the defense was going to object. Trying to give them the opportunity to do that in an in-camera setting.
All right.
Which, Your Honor, for both of those, I think they are admissible. As first of all, again, we're not offering any drug use, and we've had some discussion about that yesterday. We're not offering any drug use for the purposes of what's improper under 404. In this particular instance, the defendant himself identifies that as a reason for these alleged misdeeds. So not only is it not 404, it's just part of the res geste of his statement, which is part of what's been admitted.
It was admitted yesterday, so we're beyond that issue as far as the court is concerned.
All right. And then as far as the side of the road,
of which have not been disclosed, but the email from Mr. Murdaugh doing rehab was published by the defense.
Yes, sir. And then secondly, along with the side of the road, again, at this point in time, just going to be admitted that he heard about what had happened to the defendant. There are other circumstances that we talked about earlier that we would address at a later time. About the side of the road, which we believe is admissible and admissible under 404. We could I don't know that we need to have an in-camera proceeding at this point in detail about that, but because all he's going to say is he heard that happen, but I just wanted to, again, and out of abundance of caution, we've gone this far. I just wanted to be, before I elicited anything along those lines, just wanted to alert the defense and give them a chance to object.
All right. Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, we do object, Your Honor. First, he's not the proper witness to be testifying about what happened on the side of the road. He just hears it secondhand, so any information he has is just hearsay. In the in-camera hearing, he also provided his opinion that Alec must have tried to commit suicide, and that's improper. So first it's hearsay, but more importantly, Your Honor, it is a bridge too far under the narrow exception that you've offered, that they're offering this evidence of financial crimes, that is a motive for this alleged murder that he committed. And so the fact that whether it was an assisted suicide or they want to go further and say it's part of the same scheme and that it's a sympathy ploy, which the court hasn't ruled upon, and we don't think it meets the standard there, and it violates Rule 403. So for all those reasons, we object to it coming into evidence.
Do you want to proffer what Mr. Attorney Wilson is going to say about it?
I believe during his prior testimony in the in-camera hearing, and I certainly can do that, he
I
testified.
recall his prior testimony.
Yes, sir. And
Which did not involve anything about a roadside shooting.
well, and so I'll go ahead and proffer, Your Honor. Yes, sir. All right. So, Mr. Wilson, kind of jumping ahead, you had a confrontation with the defendant on September 4th when you drove to Hampton County to have a meeting with him on the porch of Almeda. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And pull the mic forward to you a
Yes.
little bit. And without getting into all that detail, after that conversation, he made some admissions to you at that time. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And just very quickly tell the court what he said.
He admitted or said that he had had a drug problem for 20 plus years, and that he was going to rehab. And then he said he admitted he had been stealing money.
Okay. And did he say anything about the 192 with you? Did he have a phrase he used for that?
Yes, sir.
What did he say?
You don't have to proffer this portion. You're indicating you're trying to go beyond this into something else.
What time did this? Yes, sir. Thank you, Your Honor. What time did this conversation take place, roughly?
Late morning, just before lunch.
All right. And that's on September 4th.
Saturday, September 4th. Yes, sir.
After that confrontation, did you leave?
I did.
And where did you go?
I went through Hardee's in Hampton, grabbed a bite of lunch at the drive-through, and then drove back towards Columbia.
Did you hear about anything relating to the defendant within a couple hours?
I did. I got a phone call from Leecope. Might have been Randy, but I think it was Leecope that called me and said Alec had been shot in the head and was being helicoptered. I thought he said to Savannah Hospital. I know he said to the hospital in a helicopter.
That's as far as this witness would go.
And I've sustained the objection as to this portion of the testimony. I agree with the defense's hearsay, and if it's and he's not the appropriate witness to testify on this issue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So obviously, yeah, all right. And you're a lawyer. You understand where to stop.
Yes, sir.
All right.
We'll take a recess for about 10 minutes.
Come to order. Please be seated.
You may bring the jury. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. When we left off, we were talking about the $192,000 that you had put in your trust account to cover the defendant, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he had signed his promissory note up on the screen. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Before I move on real quick, I want to show you what's been previously admitted into evidence of States 313 and see if you recognize that.
I do, yes, sir.
And what is that?
Looks like the original of the $225,000 check payable to Richard Alexander Murdaugh, Esquire, from my trust account dated March 10th, 2021 on this case.
All right, and that's your signature on there, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Catch the jury back up. He had asked you to send that email. You sent the email in July, and then you had those conversations in August that ultimately led to that promissory note, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then nothing more going on with it. Does anything happen in early September related to this?
Yes, sir.
And what day was it?
Friday, September the 3rd.
Tell me what happened.
About 3 o'clock in that afternoon, I'm with a group of guys. I get a phone call from Leecope. I tell Lee that I can't really talk much because I'm in the middle of a crowd. He says Alex stealing money, that we found out Alex stealing money from the firm and from clients, and he's going to resign from the firm. And he wanted to know if I had the $792,000 in my trust account. I told him I did. He said, well, we're going to need to get that paid to us, and asked me not to say anything to anybody about any of it until the following Tuesday when they could issue a press release.
When you told him you had that $792,000 in your trust account, did that still include $192,000 that you had covered?
It did.
Okay. What happened next?
I talked to Lee very briefly again. He told me he was in the middle of trying to deal with all that they were dealing with, and he couldn't talk. That first phone call from him was like very brief, and then I think we talked again after I got away from the crowd. But he told me that he couldn't talk long, that they were in the middle of trying to deal with all that they were dealing with, and that we would talk later. And I had to kind of go back to the crowd that I was with and try to act as much as I could like normal, so that, I think they realized that I'd stepped away and take a phone call that had bothered me, and I tried to pretend like things were as normal as they could be until I could get away from that crowd.
Did this shock you to hear this?
Yes, sir.
Is that something you expected to hear about your friend, the defendant?
Not at all. I didn't expect that to be the purpose of Lee's phone call to me when I took it.
What happened next? Did you attempt to call the defendant?
I think I texted him. I may have tried to call him after I got where I wasn't in the middle of a crowd of people. I think I may have called or texted him or both. And he texted me back something to the effect of that he couldn't talk right then. That I think he said he was meeting with probate attorneys or something to that effect, and that he couldn't talk right then and he would call later or we could talk later.
When Leecope called you, did he say anything about this check that's up on the screen?
He did.
What did he say?
He said that they had found a check in Alec's office from my firm that was made payable directly to him. I don't remember exactly how he described it, but he said, we found a check. We found out that Alec's stealing money from the clients and the firm, and we found a check from your office, and I need to know if you've got that $792,000 in your account. We're going to need to get that paid to us, and I need you not to say anything until Tuesday when we can issue a press release.
How long do you think after you got that call or those calls from Lee that you tried to reach out to your friend, the defendant?
It probably took me an hour, maybe two, to finish what we were doing and get to where I could, where I felt like I could reach out to him without being in the middle of other people.
And what was his response again?
Something to the effect of he couldn't talk right then, that he was, I think it was something to do with the fact of meeting with probate attorneys or something like that, and that he would talk to me later.
This is on September 3rd?
Friday, September the 3rd. The phone call from Lee was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon or so.
Did you talk to Alec later on that day?
That night, yes, sir.
And what was your conversation then?
I don't remember if he called me or I called him and was able to get him. And I said, Alec, I need to know what's going on. You know, Lee has called me about this, and I need to talk to you, and it needs to be face-to-face. I need to know what's going on. And he was non-committal about meeting, said he had a number of things he had to deal with, and that he would try to meet with me the next day.
Okay. So
I mean, I was at home. My wife was there. You know, I mean, I was talking to him on the phone, but I wanted to talk to him face to face to find out what was going on.
How were you feeling?
Shocked, betrayed, mad. I mean, I don't know, numb. I didn't.
What happened the next morning? Was that Saturday?
Saturday morning, September the 4th.
What year?
2021.
Did you try to get in touch with the defendant?
I did. I woke up early that morning, told my wife. I mean, I had, you know, told her that evening that there was a problem. I didn't get into a lot of detail with her, just told her there was a problem. And woke up the next morning, told her I was going to drive down to Beaufort. I thought Alec was staying at his brother's house, and I was going to drive down and talk to him. And so I got in the car and took off driving towards Okatee.
Were you trying to get in touch with him and
Called
not
him a bunch.
Not getting in touch with him?
No answer. No, sir.
So you just decided to go on down there and find him?
Yes, sir.
So you drive where?
I started driving down I-95 towards Okatee, and he called me before I was going to get off and go to John Marvin's place. But he got off. He called me before.
Slow down. You say Okatee. What's Okatee?
I mean, that's what I call the area where his brother John Marvin lives. It might not be technically correct, but that's what I call it.
But that's where you thought he was?
I was under the impression that's where he was staying, yes, sir.
So you were just going to show up?
I was hoping that he would call me back on my way, but if not, I was just going to show up, yes, sir.
And so what happened along the way?
He called me while I was on the road down there and told me that he was sorry he hadn't been able to take my call. He would meet me at his mother and father's house at Almeda.
Did that meeting ultimately happen?
It did.
About what time did that happen?
Kind of late mid-morning. I want to say around 11 o'clock or so, sometime before lunch.
Okay. And so tell me about that meeting.
I got there before he did. I think I waited in the car maybe out at the front of the driveway, and then when he pulled in, I followed him in. We got out, didn't say anything in the driveway. Went through the side door. I believe caretaker was there. The lady that helped take care of, one of the ladies at least that helped take care of Miss Libby was there. She went kind of towards the back, and he and I went out on the front porch.
Okay. What was your conversation with him on the front porch? About what time was this again?
I don't know the exact time. Sometime between 10:30 and noon, but I want to say it was around 11 o'clock or so.
Okay.
It was about, I was there for about 20 minutes.
All right. Tell me about the conversation that you had.
We went out on the front porch. We still hadn't said anything to each other than he said, let's go out on the front porch and talk. We went out on the front porch, and I looked at him, and I said, Alec, and I'm sure I said F or H or something. I said, what the is going on? I need to know what's going on. Because I know about this thing that Lee's called me about, and I need to know if there's something else you've done that involves me that I don't know about. That's a problem for me. What is going on?
What does he say?
He didn't say anything. He broke down crying. Said, I can't talk. I can't right this second, Chris. He walked inside and grabbed a handful of paper towels and came back out on the porch and said, I'm sorry. I've had a drug problem. I'm addicted to opioids. And I don't remember if he said 20 years or exactly how many years, but he said, I've been addicted to opioids for something like 20 years, I think is what he said. And, I don't remember exactly how the conversation went. There were parts where it was, I don't want to say heated, like we were screaming and hollering at each other and it never came to blows, but there were parts where it was heated and parts where it was silent and parts where it was probably calmer. He said he had a drug addiction, and then he admitted he had been stealing money,
From who?
From his law firm and from clients.
Did he say?
And he didn't specifically spell any certain person out or any certain organization out, but he said, I've been stealing from the firm and from clients.
What did he say about that 192 with you? What was the phrase he used?
I have to cuss to say it. He said,
Go ahead and say it.
He said, I shit you up. I'm sorry, I've shit you up. I've shit a lot of people up. I asked him, how long has this been going on? I couldn't believe that I didn't know it. Never saw it. Never suspected it. Drugs or money.
And what did he say?
Just said it had been going on for a long time.
Did he say anything else in this conversation?
Just said he had been good about covering it up, especially the drugs. I didn't really ask much about I didn't know the extent of the client stuff. I knew about me and my $192,000. And in the phone call with Lee, he had said that Alec had been stealing from the firm and from clients. But I didn't know about any specific clients or any specific cases. So we didn't talk about that. I didn't ask about that.
How'd the conversation end?
I don't remember exactly how it ended. I know I left. I don't remember. Like I said, I know we didn't come to blows, and we weren't screaming and hollering at each other when I left, and I wasn't screaming and hollering at him. I was angry. I didn't know how to feel. But at some point I left.
Where'd you go after that?
I started driving back to Columbia and just went through the drive-through at Hardee's in Hampton to grab something for lunch on the way out.
Since that conversation on September 4th, shortly before noon, have you had any conversation with the defendant since then?
No verbal conversations. No, sir.
Did you ever get a text from him?
I've received 1 or 2 texts from him.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as States 351, see if you recognize this.
Yes, sir. It's a text I received from Alec on September the 16th. I responded on September the 17th.
Put States 351 up on the screen. That's the text you received from Alec.
Offered that in evidence.
My apologies, Your Honor. This time I offer States 351 in evidence.
Yes, sir.
No additional objections, Your Honor.
Submitted.
All right, now I'm going to put it up on the screen. Was that the text you received from the defendant?
It is, yes, sir.
Was that the usual number you have for him, or was that a different number?
It's not the normal number. I don't know that I'd ever seen that number before.
Since that time, you haven't had any conversation with him?
I think he texted me maybe one other time, and I tried to respond with something as basic as what I said there, just trying to respond, but not really communicate. I think there may have been one other text very similar to that.
You ever get that $192,000 back?
No, sir.
And when you covered your friend and put that in your trust account, is it because you trusted him?
Yes, sir.
On June 7th, 2021, you're looking again at States 452. The defendant had texted you, call me if you up, correct?
Yes, sir.
And going back to 451, you called him once and he didn't answer, and then got that second call. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. He texted me at 9:52. I called him at 9:52. 1 minute, there was no answer, and then I called back at 9:53.
And that was a 3-minute call, that second call?
I can't read on the sheet, but it was very short. I think it was 3 or 4 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes.
2 or 3 minutes? 3 or 4 minutes?
Yes, sir. Very short.
And you talked to him, I think you've testified, mentioned a couple things, and he said that he was where and he needed to go?
He said, I'm about to get back home. You know, service is always bad out here. Can we just talk tomorrow? Or he might have said, I'm about to get back to Moselle. I don't remember which phrase he used.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Please answer any questions the defense has.
Mr. Griffin?
Stuff. There you go. Good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Good morning, Mr. Griffin.
One thing you said in answering Mr. Waters' questions on when you got to Moselle late night on the 7th or early morning on the 8th, he asked you something about, did you talk to Alec about the fee issue? And your response was, I did not know there was an issue with the fee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you did not know that there was any issue with the fee on June 7th, 2021, correct?
No, sir.
The only conversation you had with anyone about the fee before June 7th, 2021 from the law firm was with Leecope, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he just asked you something about, do you still have money from the Ferris case in your trust account?
He asked me if all the money had been dispersed from those cases.
And you told him it had not. And you told him truthfully it had not, correct?
Yes, sir. We were holding money back from medical liens, cost, a number of different things.
And you never had any follow-up questions by Mr. Cope before June 7th, right?
No, sir.
You did have a conversation with Alec, and he gave you some explanation. I forgot. What was the explanation he gave you?
After my paralegal, Vicki, forwarded me that email that she had received from their firm saying that there was an issue with the cost, I called Alec and said, hey, look, got this email that says there's a problem with cost, that you think you're owed more cost, no mention of fees, and if you're owed more cost, just let me know what they are and we'll get it worked out. We were holding money to deal with some things, and I didn't think the client would have any problem making sure all our costs got paid before the final amount of money was dispersed to the client. I said, hey, if there's a problem with cost, let me know. And he said, no, it's good. I said, hey, this is the case I dispersed directly to you on the fees. Is everything all right? He said, yeah, it's fine. The firm knows about it. I just got to make sure they know it's on the books already.
So he wasn't frantic, panic. There was no panic in his voice about the conversation about the fee you had?
Nothing that I heard or saw,
Right.
no, sir.
So as far as you knew, as of June 7th, there's no issue with the fee, right?
I didn't know about any issue with fees prior to June the 7th, or even after that.
And no one was demanding from you the ferris fee money, the PMPED portion of the ferris fee money
No, sir.
before June 7th. Right?
No, sir. I had not received any direct contact or request for payment of fees. My paralegal had already advised his paralegal that the fees had already been paid.
Okay. Now you said a number of times in your testimony that in June and July you were worried that Alec may kill himself.
We were worried that, he was distraught. He's destroyed and upset all the time, and not eating, not sleeping, sometimes not seeming like he was just focused in and even there. And not just me, his law partners, his family. I talked to his brothers, I talked to his partners several times throughout the month of June and July just about him and what we were worried about may happen or what he may do.
And the reason he was distraught was over the death of Maggie and Paul, right?
Yeah, yes.
And at no point in time, when you're thinking, I'm afraid he might hurt himself, you weren't thinking he had any involvement in June, July, during this period of time with the murders of Maggie and Paul.
No, sir.
And that your thoughts were with him because he was a grieving husband and father.
Yeah, so my thoughts were with him, his whole family, and especially him and Buster.
And you reached out to him as much as you could.
Yes, sir.
Now, there did come a time when you were a little worried about your $192,000 and you asked him to sign this handwritten promissory note.
Yes, sir.
You testified about that. And you had a conversation about how he's going to get you paid, right?
Yes, sir.
And in that conversation...
Well, that conversation about how he was going to get me paid, I think, was prior to that. I don't think we talked about how I was going to get paid when he signed the $192,000. I just simply knew enough to know, or felt like I knew enough of probate law and law, that if something happened to him, whether he did it to himself or something else happened to him, and I couldn't make a claim against his estate without that piece of paper. So I don't think we talked about payment or how he might get me paid that day. He had mentioned previously that he was trying to deal with Maggie's estate, he was trying to deal with his father's estate, and he had some property he thought was going to sell.
But he was telling you that he did not have the money at the time.
Yes, sir.
And that conversation was for the day of the promissory note, which I think is mid-August or something.
August 17th, I think it was.
And that he mentioned that Maggie's estate was tied up. His dad had died. You remember when his dad died?
Very vividly, yes, sir. Very much.
It was
Thursday, June the 10th.
June the 10th. It's like 3 days after Maggie and Paul were murdered, right?
Yes, sir.
And that wasn't unexpected, was it? His dad had been seriously ill.
No, sir. I went by to see Mr. Randolph one of those days after June the 7th, but before June the 10th. My wife and I had gone down to see Buster and Alec, or she had come down while I was already there, and we rode over to Almeda to see, mostly to see Randolph, but to see Libby too.
And I guess he died within a day or so of you visiting with him.
So I think it was the next day.
But Alec thought he was going to get some money from his dad's estate that maybe didn't go through probate that would enable him to quickly pay you back.
That's what he said. Yes, sir. I don't think he said anything about it going directly through. He just said, you know, I've got some money that'll be coming to me from my father's estate also.
And, you know, the difference between life insurance, beneficiaries of life insurance policies, the benefits do not go through the estate, do not get tied up in the estate.
Just enough to be dangerous probably, but yes, sir.
Well, the point is, he never said to you, oh, I have this $1 million policy on Maggie's life, I have a $5 million policy on Maggie's life, or any life insurance that he was expecting to come into as a result of Maggie's death, right?
No, sir, not at all.
And after Maggie died and Paul died, he wasn't out spending lavishly with newfound money, was he?
No, sir, not that I saw.
In fact, you know, he didn't even go to Moselle to stay a single night after Maggie and Paul were murdered. You know that?
I don't know that myself directly, but every time I spoke to him, he was either staying with his brothers or staying with his in-laws. I don't think he ever went back to Moselle.
Now, you've known Alec for
1985, 86, however long that is.
That's
37 years, I guess, if my math's right.
your math's better than mine.
38, something like that.
And he said to you that he had had an opioid addiction for over 20 years?
I don't remember exactly the number of years, but I mean, I believe it was, he said, I've been addicted to opioids for about 20 years or more than 20 years.
Well, let's just say the last 5 years.
Yes, sir.
Over the last 5 years, you've known him. If he was addicted to opioids, did you notice any change in his behavior?
Not a thing, not at all.
And you were around him and in a business capacity,
Yes, sir.
professional. You were sending him cases.
Yes, sir.
He was acting like the normal Alec that you've known since college,
Since law school.
since law school,
Yes, sir.
and nothing about his demeanor set red flags off to you as to, man, he must be on something today.
No, sir. I mean, I didn't see pill bottles when we would travel together for depositions or things like that. He didn't seem to be out of it. He seemed to be capable of handling the work that we were doing. You know, when we would socialize together, didn't see anything that indicated that he was addicted or had a drug problem or was using drugs.
And if he was addicted to drugs for the last 5 or 10 years, I mean, he was, from your observation, was a loving husband and father,
Yes, sir.
and you didn't observe him engaging any erratic behavior around his wife and kids?
No, sir.
Do you know anything about from your medical, well, from your legal career handling personal injury cases? Do you know, have you learned information about building up tolerances to painkillers, patients and clients of yours who have built up tolerances?
Not really enough to talk about it much or testify for sure.
Sure. So I'm going to go back, cover some ground you've already talked about. But
Sure.
law school, you and Alec were roommates at one point in time, correct?
We were, yes,
and,
sir.
And then he actually married Maggie while he was in law school, right?
He did.
And you married Dana after you graduated or while you were in law school as well?
Shortly after graduation.
And Maggie and Dana were sorority sisters at University of South Carolina?
They were.
Now, you went to South Carolina Law School, but you were
Wofford College in Spartanburg.
Harvard
undergrad.
of the upstate, right?
Yes, sir.
And you and you became really good friends with Alec during law school.
Alec and I we were friends and hung out a lot, studied together, did some things like that first year, but we got to be much closer friends throughout that end of the first year of law school. We lived together second year, and he married Maggie into our third year of law school.
And then you married Dana, and y'all would do a lot of things together as couples, wouldn't you not?
Yes, sir.
And one of the things y'all like to do is go to South Carolina football games. Right?
Yes, sir.
And Alec played for the University of South Carolina. You knew that.
Yes, sir.
And had a knee injury when he was playing.
I did know that. Yes, sir.
And then as you grow as married couples, you had children. He has children. Your oldest daughter was 1 year younger than Buster.
Yes, sir.
And then you have a son who's
2 years younger
few
than
years
Paul.
younger than Paul, right?
Yes, sir.
And your daughter and Paul were really good friends.
Yes, sir.
And friends with Buster as well.
Yes, sir.
And
Our kids grew up together.
exactly.
Even our youngest, who's younger than their two, they all grew up together.
And you and Dana and your kids and Maggie and Alec and Paul and Buster would vacation together when they were younger before the kids started wanting to do things on their own, right?
Yes, sir. We would vacation together and go, on trips away while the kids were younger, and would follow you around. And as they got older, kind of doing their own things. Those vacations kind of went by the wayside, but we would spend a lot of time down at Edisto Beach. We have a house down at Edisto, and they had a house at Edisto, and so a lot of our time together would be spent down there or at Columbia at Carolina football games or things like that.
Right.
And my wife and Maggie were sorority sisters and became much closer friends through Alec and my friendship.
And I'll get on to that a little more. But and you did a lot of work with Alex. You weren't in the same law firm with him, but you worked on same cases or related cases a lot, correct?
Yes, sir. More so in the beginning, but throughout the entire time I've known him, yes, sir.
And so just sort of some examples. So if two people were in an automobile accident, one's a driver and one's a passenger, the same lawyer shouldn't represent both parties to the accident, right?
In most cases, yes, sir.
And so frequently you would send him the passenger or the driver or vice versa.
Sometimes it would be that, and sometimes it would just be straight, I represent somebody who's been injured in some way, and I need you to help me with that one person. But sometimes what you're talking about there about referring to one of the two people out is called conflict of interest or conflicting them out.
Right.
And Alec would conflict me cases sometimes, and I would conflict him cases sometimes.
And you had a lot of respect for his ability as a lawyer, right?
I wouldn't have associated him or sent people to him if I didn't.
And you wouldn't associate him on the Ferris case if you didn't think he could do a good job, right?
Not at all.
And he did a really good job in the Ferris case, right?
Yes, sir. I mean, our result was our client was very satisfied with the result.
Right. And Alec participated fully in the entire case, and I think Mr. Waters asked, he even gave the closing argument to the judge, right?
He did. I mean, we had to spend a lot of time getting ready for trial, even though it wasn't in front of a jury, which sometimes doesn't come with quite as many things to have to do. Even in front of a judge, it takes a lot of work to put a case together. And so we spent a lot of time getting ready for that trial, and even working the weekend before it started in Columbia out of a central location there.
And had you tried cases with Alec in the past?
I have.
Tried cases with Alec in front of juries like this right here?
Yes, sir.
And I don't have to tell you, but doing what we're doing here, it can be very stressful, can it not?
It's very stressful, yes, sir.
Long nights, and get up early in the morning.
A lot of hours juggling a lot of things.
And did you ever, were around him during the stress of trial or cases where he just totally lost his faculties, just went off on the handle because he was on opioids? Did you ever see anything like that?
No, sir.
He was able to function in high-stress situations, correct?
Yes, sir. I mean, sometimes getting Alec to focus on the case and on what you were trying to get accomplished was difficult, but that was from all the way back in law school. That was from day one. But when he focused, he was extremely able to get it done.
And one witness described Alex normal as being fidgety.
Just sometimes not as focused as you'd like for him to be. He was taking phone calls and talking to this and looking at that and taking another phone call, and sometimes you have to say, look, man, we got to sit down and focus on this and get this taken care of.
Now, that brings me to another point. Would he always take a phone call if Maggie called him?
Always.
Would he always take a phone call if Paul called him?
Always.
Would he always take a phone call if Buster called him?
Always.
No matter what was going on?
Not when I was around him. If we were in court, he wouldn't take a phone call, but in depositions, he would sometimes get up and walk out and take calls. And if you were talking to him, trying to get a full conversation out with him in one breath was impossible because he was going to take a phone call.
And you traveled around with him for business?
Yes, sir.
Did he? Was he frequently talking to his wife and sons?
Yes, sir. Seemed to be.
You talked to him multiple times a day, right?
Yes, sir.
When you were with him, did you see him talking to Maggie, Paul, and Buster multiple times?
I could tell who he was talking to on the phone. We didn't have to travel as much together later in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years just because we were working less cases. Sometimes we wouldn't have to go as many places for depositions and things. But yes, if we were traveling, I could tell he was talking to his family on the phone.
Right. Was it hard to get Alec to go on guy trips? Did he prefer to spend time with his family over guy trips?
He seemed to, yes, sir. Most any trip that I think I've ever been on with Alec generally was family.
Right.
He's not the kind of guy that would take off and go spend a golfing weekend with us, or I think they like to spend their time hunting and fishing and doing things as a family.
And you, going back to this ferris case that was tried in Columbia, do you remember Maggie coming up and staying with him during the trial?
I don't. I think she may have come up like that Sunday before we started the trial. I was staying at home in Columbia and he was staying in a hotel. So I think that's why I stayed in the hotel, because Maggie was coming. And we were in that point, I think we were just renting a house because we were between places and didn't have a lot of space. But I wouldn't want to testify to that under oath. But I think so.
Sure. You would go to lawyer conventions with Alec? You would go to the same conventions. And
Sure.
And you mentioned the trial lawyers, one at Hilton Head, first weekend of every August.
Yes, sir.
And before the tragic events of June 7th, 2021, would he always go with Maggie and Paul and Buster?
Most all the lawyers that go to that convention bring their families along. It's a big time that everybody gets to know each other, know each other's family, and Maggie and Paul and Buster would always be there.
And during football season, South Carolina, did he and Maggie have season tickets?
Yes, sir.
He'd go to the games with his family?
Yes, sir.
And you would tailgate with them?
Yes, sir. They would generally have a family tailgate that Miss Libby would put together. And then when she got sick, I don't remember who kind of took it over, but they always had a family tailgate. And if we weren't tailgating with them, we would always make it a point to stop by and at least speak.
And he had, they had season basketball tickets.
Yes, sir.
Right. And he and Maggie would go to just about every home basketball game.
Yes, sir.
For the University of South Carolina men's basketball team.
Yes, sir.
We had some pretty bad basketball teams over the years. Right?
They were actually pretty good, I think, in those years. But
okay.
I think that was Final Four. Actually, I think Alec bought the tickets for the year after the Final Four when they tanked. So,
right.
Yeah, you might not have seen the best basketball.
And then you went to baseball games together.
Yes, sir.
And
I don't know how much baseball we didn't do a lot of baseball ourselves, but I think they did some.
And we'll get to this, but the weekend before June 7th, it would be June 6th and June 5th, you actually went to the super regionals with Maggie and Alec and Buster and his girlfriend Brooklyn, you and your wife, correct?
Yes, sir. It was only on that Saturday that we were with them, which would be June the 5th. They had come up for the weekend Carolina baseball tournament, and my wife and two of our children met up with them on Saturday and went and hung out at some mutual friends' place for a while before we all went to the ball game, kind of separated and went to different seating areas at the ball game.
Would you agree that Alec's number one priority was his family?
Yes, sir. Appeared that way to me.
When I say his family, I'm talking about Maggie, Paul, and Buster.
His whole family, yes, sir.
And you mentioned that you became good friends with Maggie's family, Mr. and Ms. Branstetter.
Yes, sir.
And her sister Marion, and
Not so much with Marion and her husband Bart. I mean, I knew them and I was around them, but not so much friendly or close to them as with Maggie's mom and daddy.
and what was Alec's relationship with Maggie's dad?
Seemed to have a very good relationship with them. Spent a lot of time together. They would come to Moselle, or Maggie and Alec and their children would go visit them in Somerville, or Papa T would come up sometimes and try to hunt or do things like that.
You knew him as Papa T as well?
Yes, sir.
And what did you know Miss Branstetter as?
Miss Ken. I think they called her Grandma, but I called her Miss Ken.
And they vacationed at Edisto, Mr. and Miss Branstetter, with Alec and Maggie and Buster and Paul, right?
They would be at Edisto some, yes, sir.
And can you tell us a little bit about Alec's relationship with Paul and Buster's friends?
Alec and Maggie both seemed to welcome, I mean, they were great to my children and seemed to welcome my children into their house and into their lives, and did the same for Paul and Buster's other friends.
And the and at Edisto was Alec and Maggie's home, was that opened up to a lot of Paul and Buster's friends? They have a lot of people staying over, coming over and visiting?
You know, it seemed to be that way. I mean, I wasn't over there all the time when there were children or kids around, but sometimes, yes, sir. And my kids would say, especially my daughter would say, I'm going over to hang out with Paul and or Buster at their place.
Right. And do you remember, sort of move forward, Memorial Day weekend of 2021?
I do.
Did you and your family go to Edisto that weekend?
We did.
And was Alec down there with Maggie and Paul and Buster and some of Paul's friends?
There were.
And do you remember getting together over at Alec's, Maggie's home over that weekend?
Yeah, we got together Saturday evening, I believe it was. We got together to cook out over at their house Saturday evening with them and a bunch of other people.
And Maggie and Alex getting along as far as you knew?
Yes, sir.
Was it a fun time had by everyone, best you could tell?
Yes, sir. I think it was right around about Alec's birthday. We not only were cooking out like a big shrimp bog, but also having some cake and kind of a little birthday celebration.
Right. I want to play that right quick, Your Honor. I think it's Defendant's Exhibit 61 or 59, Doug? 61. 61 is in evidence, Your Honor. Play it very briefly. Tell me if this is what you're referring to.
Yes, sir.
Apparently we don't have audio again. Just run it through. We don't have to have audio. Who is that?
It's Paul.
That Alec?
Yes, sir.
And that's you.
Yes, sir.
And is that a typical family gathering? Was this something like really didn't happen very often?
No, that was, I mean, the times that I was around them and their family, things were much like that.
So that was the weekend of Memorial Day weekend, and then the very next weekend was the Super Regional Baseball games in Columbia, right?
Yes, sir.
And that's when you met up with Maggie and Alec on Saturday at a tailgate with, y'all had a mutual friend, I think maybe whose son played?
His son played for Carolina, yes, sir.
Right.
I think it was one of Maggie and Dana's sorority sisters, and a guy that Alec knew from college, but I don't know if they were, I don't know how they knew each other, and their son played first base for Carolina.
Okay. And
and it was Maggie, Alec, Buster, and his girlfriend, Brooke.
and you stayed, you maybe didn't see Alec and Maggie on Sunday, but I think y'all communicated, just about how poorly
We
South
talked,
Carolina
and
did.
my wife talked to Maggie. Saturday after we tailgated before the game, we all split and went our separate ways to go sit in different areas. And I don't think we saw them after that on Saturday. We were supposed to get together on Sunday, or try to get together on Sunday, but didn't do so and ended up going to the game separately. But we talked or texted, and I think Dana talked or texted with Maggie.
Sure. And I believe you testified earlier that during this weekend you had gotten an update on Alec's dad, and he wasn't doing so well.
Yes, sir. I know on Sunday I talked to Alec when they were going home, or they were headed home, and we were talking about just how the Gamecocks had, blown the chance to move forward, and we talked about his dad, and that's when he told me things were getting much worse with Mr. Randolph.
Okay.
But I kind of already knew that from the days and, leading up to that. I already kind of knew that. We had talked about it before, but I remember that Sunday, him telling me things were really getting much worse.
And you knew that with a common knowledge in the tight-knit legal community of Hampton and Colleton area?
I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I knew that, and people seem to know that, yes, sir.
And Mr. Randolph was he was beloved by a lot of people, was he not?
Yes, sir.
And not just his immediate family, but the broader legal community.
And most people I knew that knew Randolph seemed to respect and love him. Really, everybody I knew.
Right. And we know he died on June the 10th, right?
Thursday, June the 10th, yes, sir.
There's been, how's it going? You mentioned something, I just want to go back to the Ferris case, and you and Alec and Mr. Ridgway, who were representing the plaintiffs, Ms. Ferris, or the estate, that you thought Mack Truck didn't want to produce some discovery, and that leveraged y'all in the ability to basically just have a damages hearing
Yes.
with a judge. Is that right?
Yeah, so we had some discovery we had asked for. They sought not to produce it. We had some motions to compel that were argued. I think we were successful in those. I mean, I can't say what they were thinking, but it felt like that we had an opportunity to structure a good chance for our client to get a good result, because they didn't want us moving forward with some discovery.
And so in the Ferris case, you succeeded in getting an order to produce the information you sought, yet y'all worked out a different way to resolve the case. Is that right?
Just kind of, not to get too deep into it, but just to give you some context. This is like, there was only one prior of something like this happening in the world that we could find, like in Australia or something.
Right.
And this was one of the only times that it had happened while a vehicle was actually in motion on a highway. I think it might have been the first time that it actually happened. So there was very little. There was very little chance we felt like that we were going to be able to make a punitive damage case out of it, because there had not been a lot of prior instances for Mack to be on notice on. So for us to waive that didn't feel like we were giving up much, and I think they did not want us to discover some things because there might be other cases that were coming from that defect. This was very early on in the discovery of that defect and things starting to happen with it.
And moving back on track, I'm sorry for diverting, but
Sure.
on Monday, June the 10th, you didn't speak to Alec any during the day, as I understand it.
Monday would have been June 7th, but I don't remember.
I'm sorry,
That's
Monday,
okay.
June 7th, yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember speaking to him on that day, earlier in the day.
But you had some things you needed to talk to him about. And you mentioned a case where a potential product liability case,
Yes, sir.
and that whoever was holding the equipment wanted to, either you got to come inspect it or don't inspect it.
Yeah, they wanted us to go ahead and get it inspected so that they could put it back into operation. We needed to gather what we wanted from it so they could repair it and put it back into operation.
And so Alec calling you on Monday, June the 7th was not surprising, right?
No, sir.
I mean, because you could talk multiple times a day, you just hadn't talked this day.
Yes, sir.
And when and you would talk to him when he was traveling, to the office and back to Moselle frequently. I mean, it wasn't the first time you'd ever talked to him when he left Moselle or coming back to Moselle.
I mean, I don't know where somebody is when I'm talking to him on the phone, but I mean, it oftentimes he would say, I'm, headed to Moselle or I'm leaving the office. I mean, it felt like a lot of times when he do the same thing I do, you make your phone calls while you're in the car because you're busy doing other stuff if you're at the office or wherever else.
But it was a little more than that. I mean, you knew that when he was coming up to Moselle, the phone would normally drop.
Phone service is bad out there, yes, sir.
And you'd drop a call, would you not?
Yes, sir.
And you've been out in Moselle a lot, haven't you?
Yes, sir.
And calls get dropped out there frequently, do they not?
Yes, sir.
And you can frankly be in one part of the house and maybe have coverage and be in another part of the house and not have coverage, right?
I don't really know about parts of the house, but I mean, there'd be times that I'd be on the phone that I would drop service or not be able to get on the internet or do things like that.
And
It's spotty.
And just driving around the rural areas, I guess you know some areas where there's just dead spots, and you just know there's going to be a dead spot coming up.
Very much so.
And there were such spots on Moselle Road, were they not?
For me, when I was trying to use my phone, yes, sir.
Now you went over your phone bill to get times for phone calls, and you went through them. But I want to go through some more detailed documents that are in evidence, reviewing your phone calls with Alec on the 7th, and Defendant's Exhibit 60 is in evidence. And Doug, if you'll go to page 3078, and let me give you your copy of your Verizon bill. I guess Verizon, was that the service provider?
Yes, sir.
451. It's in evidence. I'm going to hand it to you and just compare along to some of this detailed information. And Doug, if you'll go down to the bottom entry, 91214. You got that pulled up? Can you see this and compare it to your phone bill? But it says Alec Murdaugh calls Chris Wilson at 9:12 and 14 seconds, and it was a 42-second call. Does that sound about right? I don't know that your Verizon bill is that accurate on the time.
Is this supposed to be June the 7th, Monday, June the 7th?
Yes, sir.
My phone bill that I pulled and provided, or my phone records that I pulled and provided to SLED, say I had an incoming phone call from phone number ending 1227, which is Alec's cell phone number, at 9:11 p.m. that lasted 2 minutes.
Okay. And so some of these extraction data that's in evidence says the call was 42 42 seconds long. You think you talked to him for 2 minutes, or and you may have been billed for 2 minutes, but when you got the call, you said, "I'm fixing the pump. Can I call you back?"
Yeah.
Is that a 2-minute call, or is that a 45-second call?
Hey, Bo, how you doing? I'm doing all right. I got my hands in the middle of this. Can I call you back? Yes, sure, no problem. I mean, probably shorter than 2 minutes. I don't know if that's the phone ringing and the talking.
Right.
I don't know how that works.
Okay. And then, but that was the call, and there was nothing about Alex's demeanor that alarmed you during that conversation, right?
No, sir.
He wasn't breathing heavy, was he?
No, sir.
He didn't sound panicky in any way, did he?
Not panicky, no, sir.
Just a regular conversation with Alec?
All conversations with Alec are a little bit scattered, but no, he didn't sound out of the ordinary.
All right, and then you call him back.
I did.
Sometime around 9:20. What's your Verizon bill say?
9:20 p.m. A phone call from me that lasted 3 minutes.
All right, and if you'll go to page 3082 of Exhibit 60, and if you'll, Doug, pull up the call at 9:20 with Mr. Wilson. You see it? Now, I mean, it really doesn't matter whether the Verizon bill says 2 to 3 minutes. This says 131 seconds, but this is you calling Alec back, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in that call, he is got the same demeanor?
Yes, sir.
Not breathing heavy?
No, sir.
Not being frantic in any way?
No, sir.
Just
Not that I heard.
Normal out.
Yes, sir.
And he tells you he just gets to his mom's, and that's how you end the call, right?
He says he's either getting to his mom or about to get to his mom's. I think he said, "I'm about to get to my mom's. Let me call you when I'm leaving here."
All right.
Mr. Griffin, I thought he was leaving the office for whatever reason. I don't have any reason to know that. He didn't say that. But I just assumed he had kind of worked late at the office and was headed to check on his mom before he went home.
Okay.
He said, "I'm about to get to my mom's." He didn't even say where he had been earlier or anything like that. Just, "I'm about to get to my mom's.
Well,
Can I call you? Can I call you later?"
Would it strike you as odd that he'd be going to visit his mom at 9:20 in the evening?
No, sir. I know he visited his mom often. I thought it was mostly during the day, like he'd swing over there for lunch, check on his mom and dad, but it didn't strike me as out of the ordinary for him to go in the evening. I knew sometimes he would go later.
And were you aware that his dad had been put back in the hospital on that day?
Yes, sir. Or I knew he was. I don't know that I knew for sure he was. I know on that Sunday, Alec told me he was either his daddy was being taken to the hospital or was taken to the hospital that day.
And from your knowledge, how frequently would Alec go by and visit his mom and dad?
Almost every day.
Almost every day.
Yes, sir.
When he was in town.
Yes, sir.
And did Alec work odd hours, late hours?
He would usually be somebody that was working later in the evening than a lot of other people would be. Yes, sir.
So
I don't think he got started as early as everybody else does.
So I guess from what you're testifying, his demeanor would have been in his communications with you on this phone call at 9:20, same as it would have been any day he leaves the office. There's nothing out of the ordinary.
Nothing struck me as out of the ordinary, no, sir.
And you think in this call you brought up that you needed to talk to him about the equipment?
I know I did that because they were starting to get frustrated with us and said this thing needs to get inspected so we can put it back in service. So we were needing to get that scheduled.
And he cut the call short before you finished your conversation about the equipment, saying he was pulled up to his mom or about to get to his mom. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the next entry, which I'm not sure it wouldn't show up on your Verizon bill, but if you'll go to page 3086, Doug, at the text at 952.15, which I believe that's in.
Mr. Griffin, I don't think we talked about the equipment deal when he told me he was pulling up to his mom's house.
Okay.
I mean, I asked about how his mom was doing, and I asked about how his dad was doing. And I said, hey, I need to talk to you. I might have said, hey, I need to talk to you about this equipment case, and I got something else I need to talk to you about work. We didn't get any details about it because he said, I'm about to pull up to mom's, or I'm pulling up to mom's. Let me call you back when I finish there.
Okay. Well, one thing we know you didn't talk about is the ferris fee, right?
No, sir.
Because there was no issue, as far as you knew, about the ferris fee.
I knew of no issue with that. No, sir.
Okay. So, according to this exhibit that's in evidence, there's a text at 5:52, 15 seconds. It says, call me if you're up. And I think you put that text into evidence. I may have it here. And this states exhibit 452.
Yes, sir.
Is that the text?
Yes, sir.
And what time did your well, I guess you printed that off your phone, is that right?
This exhibit 451 only shows my phone calls. It doesn't show text.
Well, the picture of the text message has a time on it, right?
Yeah, June 7th, 9:52 p.m.
Okay, and the extraction record says 9:52, 15 seconds, but you received that text?
I did.
Okay, and then if you'll go right below that, there's a phone call that you made. You made to Alex at 9:52:59. On your Verizon bill, you said 9:52 phone call to Alex?
Yes, sir.
Now, earlier you testified that was a missed call, and you didn't talk to him. I mean, the extraction record says it was for 42 seconds. Do you think you called him, got him, and the call dropped, or do you think it's a missed call?
I don't remember talking to him on that call. I either got his voice message or it didn't answer at all. That's why I called back 1 minute later.
Okay.
He may have picked up, but I didn't speak to him, and I didn't leave a message.
Okay. Well, then the next call on the log, Doug, is 9:53:55, and what time did your Verizon bill say that you made that next call?
9:53 p.m.
Okay. And so right after you tried, according to this exhibit, it was like 42 seconds after you tried the first call.
Yes, sir.
You tried him back.
Yes, sir.
And when you got him, is that when you talked about the equipment inspection?
That's when I would have said, how's your mama doing? How's your dad? We need to talk about this piece of equipment. We got to deal with this inspection that's upcoming. And I got some motions that I think it's some motions that I need some help with, something that I need a little guidance on to bounce off of you. So he was about to get back to Moselle or about to get back home and, may lose service, or was about to get back home and could we talk tomorrow?
I mean, did he in fact tell you, I'm about to drop service?
I don't think he said I'm about to drop service. I think he said I'm about to get back to Moselle. I may lose service. Can we talk tomorrow?
Okay. And again, demeanor is perfectly normal in this last conversation you had with him at 9:53, correct?
Nothing stood out as different to me.
And he wasn't breathing heavy, he wasn't being frantic, nothing out of the ordinary, correct?
Yes, nothing that I heard was out of the ordinary, no, sir.
Okay. And then you went to bed and you got notified by your wife, and the phone was blowing up, and you immediately got in the car and went to Moselle, is that right?
Immediately, yes, sir.
And you got there roughly about 1 in the morning, is that right?
About 1 in the morning, yes, sir.
And you were directed to the main house?
Yes, sir.
And there you think Alec was already in the main house?
I know he was already there because I walked in. The first thing I did was walked over. He was crying, and I was crying, and I just walked over and hugged his neck. We didn't say a word.
You remember what he was wearing?
I don't.
Who was in the...
I mean, I think I remember a white shirt, but I don't remember for sure.
Well, when you were there, did SLED agents come and take his clothes?
I was not there that I remember seeing SLED agents take his clothes or anything like that. If they did, I was somewhere else in the house.
Okay.
I did not see any of that take place. I was told that, they did, but I did not see that.
Were you told that when you were in the house?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did it appear that they had already taken his clothes when you saw Alec?
I have no idea.
Well, did you see him change clothes during the period of time you were with him?
Not while I was there, no, sir.
So while you were there, he had the same clothes on from when you got there to when you left?
As far as I remember, yes, sir. I mean, as far as I remember, yes, I was focused on my friend, his son. I wasn't paying attention to whether he changed clothes or anything like that, but I don't remember him changing clothes or anybody taking his clothes, but I wasn't really focused on that.
And what was Alec's demeanor that night?
He was destroyed.
He was destroyed.
Yes, sir. He was crying, quiet, just whimpering, trying to be gracious to the people that had come at times, but I mean, none of us knew what to say. None of us knew what to do. You know, there was a lot of quiet.
I want to ask you about the comment he was trying to be gracious. Is when Alec meets people coming up, is he polite, respectful? Is that his normal habit?
Yes, sir. He's good with people. I mean, he does it. He's the kind of person that I doesn't ever seem to have met a stranger. Always seems to talk to people.
Right. One of the things that was just, well, let's set the table. You were there, and a number of his law partners were there. Is that right?
As I recall, yes, sir.
You remember Mark Ball being there?
I don't remember Mark. I remember Mark being there at points and times, but I'm not sure about that night when I walked in.
Well, Ronnie Crosby.
I remember Ronnie being there. Austin Crosby, Leecope.
Austin Lee, Randy.
Randy, yes, sir.
I guess his brother John Marvin.
John Marvin was already there.
Okay.
I don't remember if Buster had already gotten there or not. I think he got there right after I got there.
And then y'all were there for a number of hours, and everyone said, we just need to go and try to get some rest. And so you went to your office and laid down on the couch and tried to sleep, right?
Yes, sir.
And you were back at 9 in the morning?
Yeah, somewhere thereabouts 9 shortly after.
And
pretty much. I mean, there was a lot of comings and goings, and at very points and times, Alec's partners would some be there and some not. But yes, sir, pretty much the same number of people and the same people the next morning.
Right. And at some point in time, there was a discussion and a recommendation that you agreed with that Alec not speak to any law enforcement without somebody with him, right?
Well, we were standing around in the driveway talking, and I think it was Leecope, Mark Ball. I don't remember if Ronnie Crosby was in that conversation, a couple other people. And there was some discussion about Alec's interaction with SLED. And the discussion that was had was, look, he probably doesn't need to interact with SLED without by himself, because don't know what state of mind he's in and don't know what the circumstances are. But he also doesn't need 7 or 8 lawyers trying to advise him or deal with him. I made it very clear that I wanted to be his friend and not his lawyer. That I didn't feel comfortable with that, and that one person needed to be, for lack of a better term, the point person.
And the concern was that he wasn't in a state of mind to do so, to have conversations with law enforcement.
Well, I mean, Mr. Griffin, we're all lawyers, and even if you don't practice criminal law at all, even if all you do is civil law, every lawyer knows that generally criminal lawyers advise their clients not to interact with law enforcement without their involvement or at least their approval.
Right.
And so every one of the lawyers standing there either knew that or should have known that. So whether it was his state of mind or whether it's just the general, what we're all taught and trained, But yeah, we all felt like that Alec wasn't in a position where he needed to, or maybe was even able to talk to Sled by himself.
And that's,
I felt that way, and everybody else expressed the same thing.
and then that gets to my point. You didn't believe he was able to talk to Sled because he was so distraught and destroyed over the murder of his wife and son.
That wasn't I mean, I'm not trying to argue with you. That wasn't a decision for me to make. That's why I did not want to be acting as his attorney. I wanted to be his friend. That's what I was there for. That would be a decision for whoever was going to be representing for him and his representation. Whoever it was going to be at that point in time, whoever was chosen as the point person, that was a decision for them to make about how he would interact with Sled.
I understand, but you agreed with the recommendation that he was in the state of mind to sit down and talk to Sled by himself.
I agreed that he did not need to interact with Sled by himself. Yes, sir.
Based on his state of mind.
I can't. He was destroyed. He was upset, and I don't know whether he was able to talk with Sled at that point in time by himself or not. But I knew that that's not something that somebody should do.
Do you remember testifying for the
I've
state?
done criminal work in my past, way back in the past, and that's the advice that I would give every one of my clients.
Do you remember testifying before the state grand jury, stating he, Alec, wasn't in the state of mind to do so, and that we all didn't need to be his lawyer?
I don't remember specifically saying that.
Well, I'll show you page 152, lines 22 through 25.
Sure.
See if it refreshes your recollection.
Sure. He was not in a good state of mind, I will tell you that.
152 down at the bottom.
You want me to read it out loud or just read it to myself?
Refresh your recollection that was your testimony.
Yes, sir. I said he wasn't in the state of mind to do so, and that we all didn't need to be his lawyer. I didn't want to be his lawyer. I was his friend. I didn't want to be in the lawyer scenario.
He wasn't in a good state of mind, that's for sure, correct?
No, sir. Nobody was.
Right. Now, you got there about 1 in the morning, and there were a lot of people around Alec at that point in time?
There were already people inside the house around him, yes, sir.
And then when you left, Alec was with
I think
Randy, John Marvin, Buster by that time?
I think the decision was made they would go to, that at least Buster and Alec would go to Almeda and spend the night. And I don't remember whether John Marvin or Randy went with them, but they were leaving as a family.
And as far as you know, that they left as a family, and they came back as a family the next day?
Yes, sir.
And when you got there the next day, more people showed up around Alec?
Yes,
correct?
sir.
And I think the Branstetters showed up eventually?
I don't remember. Yeah, I think Papa T and Miss Kim were there the next day.
Now, the immediate days following Maggie and Paul's murder, Alec spent a lot of time down in Somerville. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And that's where Papa T and
That's where Maggie's parents
Miss
lived.
Kennedy, and spent a lot of time with them.
Seemed to, yes, sir.
And then he would stay with John Marvin down at Okatee. You mentioned that
That's
you
where
thought-
I'm sorry. That's where I thought he was staying a lot. Yes, sir.
And he would stay with his brother Randy,
Yes, sir.
and then they would go to Edisto, he and Buster sometimes.
There were several times that he and Buster would go to Edisto, and I'd try to go down and just see them there. I think they were just, I know Buster, and I think they were just trying to kind of go somewhere where there weren't quite as many people around.
And you begged him, I think you said, or encouraged him to come to the trial lawyers convention at Hilton Head so that maybe, he and Buster could have some normal time.
At least to play golf with us one day. I told him he at least should do that.
And you were concerned he had lost a lot of weight, had he not? Or
He didn't seem to be sleeping or eating very well.
and he was, and as his friend, you tried to give him a shoulder to lean on and an ear to talk to, right?
Yes, sir.
And he asked you rhetorically, what are we going to do without Maggie and Paul? You remember that?
I don't remember those exact words, but I mean, he said he didn't know what he was going to do without them. Yes, sir. I don't know if he said, what are we going to do?
And he told you that he just couldn't go back to Moselle, that he was going to have to sell it because he just can't go back out there. Do you remember that?
He talked to me about he and Buster were going to talk about selling Moselle. He didn't. I mean, that was Paul's thing. Paul loved that property and being on that property. And I don't know that Buster loved it as much. He did, but I don't know that he loved it as much as Paul. And I don't know that they, that Elliot just talked to me about he didn't know that he was going to want to keep it, and that he didn't go. I don't think he ever went back out there and spent another night. Don't know that for sure, but I've never talked to him when he was there.
And you advised him just take it one day at a time?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wilson, do you see Buster in the courtroom? Could you stand up, Buster?
I do.
Is that Buster?
Yes, sir.
And is Brooklyn seated next to him? Can you stand up, Brooklyn? Is that Brooklyn?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you, Your Honor. Briefly, you were asked by Mr. Griffin on June 7th whether or not you brought up anything about the ferris fees, but at that point in time, you hadn't had to cover $192,000 for the defendant, had you?
No, sir, I had not.
And
It was July the 15th, 16th, 17th, somewhere around in that range, middle of July, that I had to cover that $192,000.
that he called you with some story about how he had the money in the wrong structures and he needed to send it back to you, but he was 192 short.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Don't lead the witness.
Did the defendant tell you that the issue of notifying his firm had been handled?
Yes, sir.
About the fees?
Before I wrote the checks in March and afterwards.
Before June, you were asked about that call with Leecope.
Yes, sir.
And did you talk about some fees and expenses that were still pending? Leecope?
Not with Leecope, no, sir.
What did you talk about with Leecope?
Lee asked me if all the money in the case, the Mack Trucks case, had been dispersed. And I told him that it hadn't. We were holding back some lien money, some medical bill money. And I was in Hampton, I believe, trying a case down there the whole week, and he approached me while I was working in and out of their office sometime. And I think that's when he approached me and spoke to me about it, and I told him I'd have to check. I wasn't in the office.
Did you tell Leecope at that time that you had already dispersed the fees and written them directly to Richard Alexander Murdaugh?
No, sir, he didn't ask me about the fees.
You were asked about the phone call that took place, or the phone calls, series of phone calls that you had with the defendant on the night of the murders, correct?
Yes, sir.
And he called you first, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then he sent you a text saying you up?
Yes, sir.
But in those phone calls, you were the one who raised the issue about the equipment issue, correct?
Yes, sir.
Were you the one who raised the issue about the equipment?
I did. I mean, I kept up with our deadlines and things that needed to be dealt with. And I want to say that the lawyer had reached out to me sometime around that time. I don't know whether they couldn't get Alec or just chose me to be the person to reach out to, but I was being contacted.
You were asked about him going to visit his mother at Almeda, typically during the day. And were you aware that he didn't go visit his father that day, despite the news that he had been put in the hospital?
I don't know. I don't think we talked about that night on those phone calls whether he had gone to see his father or not. I asked how his father was, but I don't think he told me whether he had gone to see his father or not.
You were asked about your conversations that night with him, and I think you said he was acting like the normal Alex.
Yes, sir.
And you were asked about the fact of your observations of him as a husband,
Yes, sir.
as a father.
Yes, sir.
You said you saw no erratic behavior over the years that you've known him.
No, sir.
Saw no evidence of opioid use over the years that you've known him.
No, sir.
You said that he came from a prominent law firm,
Yes, sir.
prominent family,
Yes, sir.
that you respected him as a lawyer,
Yes, sir.
that his clients trusted him.
Yes, sir.
I object.
Sustain.
Was the defendant effective in closing argument?
Yes, sir. Very.
Did the defendant show emotion in closing argument?
I mean, yes, sir, he did.
Was the defendant good with people?
Very good with people. That's one of Alec's strengths, is with clients and people he met, connecting to people that he, didn't know quite as personally. He could make connections with people. He seemed to know what made people tick. He knew what was important to people. He could spot issues and address issues in a case. When you got him to focus, he could handle those things.
Did your kids grow up together?
They did.
Did you try cases with him?
We did.
You've done business with him over the years? Have you done business with him over the years?
Yes, sir, lots.
Have you been roommates with him?
Yes, sir.
When you covered $192,000 for him, did you trust him and believe him when what he was telling you?
I believe that he would pay me back and that what he had told me had happened.
On September 4th,
And I knew I had to cover that money with my trust account. So, yes, sir.
on September 4th, 2021, did he confess to you the truth of his life that those of whom were close to him, no one knew?
He confessed to me things about him that I didn't know.
And you had no idea about any of that.
No, sir.
And he said it had been going on for years, the reality of his life.
He told me that he had been addicted to opioids, and I think he said either for 20 or over 20 years.
And also,
And that he had been stealing money from his clients in the firm.
and that was a lightning bolt because you had no idea, despite being his best friend.
Objection leading. Argument.
Were you one of his best friends?
Yes, sir.
Did you have any idea about any of that had been going on for a decade?
I had been told by Leecope the day before in that phone call that Alec had been stealing from his firm and from clients, and that he had a drug problem and was going into rehab, and that's the first I would have ever known that.
September 4th, 2021.
That was Friday, September the 3rd, when I talked to Leecope, and then again when I talked to Alec on Saturday, September the 4th.
Hit you out of the blue.
Like a ton of bricks. I mean, it floored me when Lee called me, and I never expected that.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Further questions? You may step down.
Thank you.
We'll recess now for 1 hour and 15 minutes. Please go to the jury room. Please do not discuss the case.